Good evening, everyone. I see our audience is growing. Ask that folks just be patient as more people join us on our panel, and we will get started as soon as everyone is here. Welcome to the seamless world of technology. I have 3 screens of panelists. Mrs. Mangan, I think we may be ready, Madam President, for you to open the meeting if you'd like and just sort of set a frame for us. And I know that Mr. Seligman is also ready when you want to do the pledge.
Okay, super. Thank you all for joining us this evening at this opportunity for parents to hear from our academic leaders, teachers, faculty, staff, everyone who has been involved in figuring out a way to have us open schools. So before we start, if everyone would please allegiance, I'd like to note that the photograph we will be seeing is a photograph that was taken by one of our art students at the high school. Please rise. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We've had a few flags at Board of Ed meetings that may or may not be the flag that I was referring to, but regardless, it is the American flag. I'm glad we rose for our pledge. This is, as I said, we are glad that everyone could join us. We're up to 525, and that seems to be increasing by the minute. I know parents are anxious to hear from everyone who is here presenting tonight. We want to thank the community for all of the emails and calls and texts that I know many members of the administration have received, as well as Board of Education members, PTA leaders. We want to thank them most of all, or also thank them for the recognition in most of those communications of what an incredibly challenging time this is. I've pointed out in Board of Education meetings that this is not a crisis of education. This is a public health crisis, and educators are among the many parts of our community and our nation that are having to address the ramifications of that public health crisis. And I know we will hear a little bit about this tonight. Unfortunately, education will not look like what we all would like it to look like until the public health crisis is resolved. And until that time comes, we will do our very best from the members of the Board of Education to the administrators, teachers, faculty, staff, the nurses, custodians, teachers' aides, every single person who is involved in education in the Harrison Central School District is committed to making sure that we make this work in the best way possible for every one of our students, regardless of age, need, what they need for their education. We are committed to doing the very best. But we know that that is not going to be what we would all want, which would be to be back in classrooms with children learning from their teachers in front of them. But until that time, we will do the very best we can do under the circumstances. Dr. Will, I will pass it over to you to start working through.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Mangan, and thanks to all of you that are taking time out of your evening. Just want to mention this is the first in a series of 3 meetings. We will discuss the middle school tomorrow night, and on Wednesday we'll discuss the elementary school program. This will be a lengthy meeting. Obviously, the level of detail that is necessary to have parents feel comfortable and understand our plan is critically important to us. Have a wonderful group of panelists. My leadership team is here along with many of our fine teachers. I want to thank them in particular for being with us tonight, giving up their summer nights to help you understand some of our challenges. Dr. Tyler is here in 3 roles. He was on our last panel. He happens to be the president of the Harris Association of Teachers, and I want that voice to be clearly heard tonight. But he's also the coordinator of our IB program and a fine teacher in his own right. So he will be adding much to the conversation tonight. And Kristen Bees, Mark Trebash, and Leah Moore are here representing the faculty along with my many administrative colleagues who support their work and some of our instructional coaches as well. I want to ask you to indulge me a little bit tonight. I'm going to go right into the presentation because I believe that it will ground our discussion, and I want everybody to know that all of you that submitted questions in advance, we as a collective have studied all of those questions. I've broken them out into broad categories, and they will all be responded to this evening as thoroughly as possible. But in the event a question doesn't get answered, or you think of one that you want to share, please just post it and we'll take a look and try to include it in that presentation. I'd ask my colleague, Mr. Greenfield, the Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum and Instruction, if you wouldn't mind launching the presentation for us. So Husky Pride is a mantra that is lived in our athletic program, but it also is an approach that our students take when they want to demonstrate their work ethic, their ethos. And so your child will be assigned to one of 2 teams, Husky or Pride. So Michael, would you move on? So this is where I want to begin tonight, because there are a lot of opinions about what we should do. And by the way, we try to listen carefully to everyone's opinion. And there are many experts in our community, medical experts, whose opinion I deeply respect. And I will tell you that those experts are at different ends of the spectrum as to what should be done. In simple terms, I have some folks thinking that we should have no masks. I have other folks thinking that we should have masks at all times. I have some folks thinking we should wear masks when we're socially distanced and some not. If you've been following along some of the research, first we were told that children weren't spreaders, then they were spreaders, then it wasn't very prevalent in kids, and now there's a study that says it is prevalent in kids. I'm mentioning all of this because there are a lot of inputs that all of us, especially parents, are receiving and experiencing. I have to be guided by the 3 elements you see on this screen. The New York State Department of Health is still defining what is permissible in public schools based on primarily the infection rate. You may recall the infection rate was the target was 5%. Currently, New York State is below 1. So that was one group that we have to listen to. The New York State Education Department also lays out for us all of the requirements we have to meet in any models that we propose for all of our diverse student populations. And we'll talk about that. And then there is the national guidance, which frankly I had more confidence in at one point, but seems to have become somewhat shifting as well. the Centers for Disease Control. But under the mandates of my oath of office and the oaths of the board, we are required to respond to these mandates. Michael, if you wouldn't mind. So I want to take you back to the primary mandate that the governor laid out for us. This is out of the document that was published in early August. Prioritize efforts to return all students to in-person instruction. That means right now, my primary responsibility is to define a model that is limited by social distancing and some other parameters to get as many kids back into school as possible based on the assessment of the entities in charge. Next slide, please. So how do we make these choices? Just go back one slide, Michael. We're jumping a little bit. There we go. All of our decisions are based on one thing and one thing only. Based on the best information we have, is it safe to return students, faculty, and staff, and safe to the greatest extent possible? Because as I shared with you, while I have a doctorate, it's not in medicine. This is not my area of expertise. And so what we hope is that we are guided by folks who have our best interest at heart, who have the public interest at heart, and we have tried to follow that guidance. Where our real work comes in is based on that guidance and knowing that the likelihood of this being a moving target, very fluid, where infection rates can go up, where infection could break out in a school. We've also tried to plan a model that respects the idea that kids may be experiencing school open, school closed, or school ultimately completely closed. Next slide. So this is what we were mandated to do. It wasn't an option. We were required to develop 3 models. The first was for 100% in-person instruction. That's an easy one. We call that school. The second one, quite a bit more complicated, and the guidelines for this model did not come out until August 13th. The hybrid model requires us to engage in social distancing, figure out masks, and all of the other safety protocols that we're going to go through tonight to talk about contact tracing, monitoring kids before they get to school, all of those things. However, we made a decision, and I want to talk to you about that decision. We have decided to go one step further. So 100% in-person, hybrid, 100% remote if we're quarantined. But many parents reached out across the state of New York and said, we don't trust that our kids will be safe in school. Now, here's where I struggle as a superintendent, but I'm also a dad. So Governor Cuomo, I think, has done quite an excellent job of driving down the infection rate, put really stringent standards in place, and New York went from being the epicenter to being a very low infection rate. And he often cited, and I was proud of him for doing so, he cited the science. We're relying on the science. And he said the standard for reopening schools safely for all children other than those that are immunocompromised would be 5%. When he made his announcement on August 7th, he touted that the rate was below 1%, and he said schools were safe to reopen based on that public health metric, and we planned accordingly. But in that very press conference, he said something else that caused me, and I know the board, to rethink our position on this concept of a virtual option. He said it's really up to parents to decide if it's safe, and that it's really up to teachers to decide if it's safe, which seemed to me to say, thinking as a dad now, which information do I make my most important choice about, the safety and well-being of my children? If it's safe, one would think it's safe for everybody. But if you're saying that it's safe and simultaneously saying it's up to you to decide, it seemed to me to be an unfair standard to establish for parents. And so in response to that ambiguity and that lack of clarity about the science, and also the various studies that are coming out on both sides of the equation, we decided that we would introduce a virtual option for anybody that wants one. So the required Michael, you're jumping around on me. You're making me dizzy. Stay still there. So the required model, if we could just go back to the required models, you have one there, are face-to-face learning, hybrid learning, online learning. We've established those. We're going to talk about them tonight. Next slide. We are now going to add a new model, the fully virtual model, which will allow you to participate virtually while we are in the hybrid mode. Next slide, please. So the real concern, this is the way we structured this. So I know that people want to get to all the options, but many of you wrote about safety. So we're going to spend a considerable amount of time just walking through the big safety ideas. I promise you no one will be rushed, and I promise you that all the questions will eventually be answered in our analysis tonight. So required social distancing. When we looked at what was required, which is essentially the 6-foot parameter, we determined about 50% of kids could come to school and be safely socially distanced. We also decided that we were going to maximize the safety of our faculty and staff by ensuring that kids would not only be 6 foot and socially distanced, but that masks would be worn. Now, I know some people think that's a difficult task for children, and it is. But also we have to remember that teachers are parents, they have lives, and they're going to be exposed to lots of kids over the course of the day. Somebody might cough, somebody might sneeze. We want to ensure that our teachers feel safe coming to school and that they know that we are taking their concerns seriously. There are lots of details in here that we're going to get into later, but we're going to talk about music and dance and physical education. Some of those have different standards. You'll learn about the 12-foot criteria in those areas when we get further along. Obviously, all the basic things that you're seeing in the world around you, signage, and the reinforcement of the social distancing will be everywhere. Hallways and stairways will be designated as one way when possible, not in every instance. And we are mindful that, that's a concern for people, but we're going to try as best we can, and you'll hear more about that later, to control the traffic flow. At the high school, hallway lockers will not be utilized. That's a decision that the high school administration has made, and we'll talk about that later. And the drop-off pickup is going to vary by building. So some of what I'm sharing with you is generic, but as we get down to the level of the particular school we're talking about, tonight it's the high school, you'll hear about those particular plans. Next slide, please. So let's talk about face coverings. Students will be required to wear face coverings at all times. There are some limited exceptions. When they're eating or drinking at lunch, and there's a number of questions about lunch, so I assure you there's going to be a whole discussion about lunch and what that will look like, but they will be permitted to remove their masks when they're having lunch. They have medical conditions or disabilities that prevent mask wearing. You've let us know that. We are going to be surveying you again on Friday to get some more information about those of you who want virtual option, and you'll have the chance, if you didn't submit something, to resubmit. We are asking that you help us by purchasing masks. There's a recent study that says certain masks are better than others. Obviously N95s are the best, but the little blue ones that everybody is wearing and buying seem to be the second most effective. In the event your child doesn't come with a mask, we will have them on hand. Schools, as I just said, will have them in case, and that will also be the case when people are getting on a bus. If they don't have them, a bus driver will have them available. There'll be very limited visitation to our schools. There'll be a whole slide about that later, but we will require any visitor to wear a mask the entire time, not only that you're in the building, but while you're on the campus. Thanks, Michael. So I'm very fortunate to have a very talented team of people. My assistant superintendent for human resources, Dr. Brian Ladwick, has done just an extraordinary job of mastering all of the discrete details around the physical health and safety and managing COVID-19. I'm going to hand this section of the presentation over to his capable hands. I will be dipping in and out of the conversation throughout the night. But Brian, this was on the minds of many families. How are we making sure that kids get to school safely, how are we containing, and a host of questions, which I will throw at you as we go through these next few slides.
If I could just interrupt before we move on, it appears that unbeknownst to us, there was a 500-person maximum on registration. Apparently there were some people trying to get in, and I just want to make sure, and we'll post this on the website and try and get the word out, that this meeting is being recorded, as will our meetings tomorrow and Wednesday, for those who weren't able to get in. And apologies for that to those who were trying to access tonight and weren't able to do that. But as I said, we will have that up on the website hopefully tomorrow.
We will definitely have it up on the website tomorrow, and we had tried to get a workaround for that, but apparently that didn't work out. So apologize for that. All right, Dr. Ledwig, you're on.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Wool. So briefly, just to mention to everyone, the Department of Health established a requirement throughout the state of New York that students and staff are screened on a daily basis for temperature and COVID symptoms. And we've been working really hard to figure out the most effective and efficient way to do that. The guidance recommends actually encouraging parents to take temperatures and answer screening questions before students leave home in the morning. And it makes good sense from the standpoint of trying to make sure that kids don't get on a school bus with a temperature or with COVID-related symptoms. And so we've implemented a screening questionnaire that will be pushed out to parents on an every night, and staff for that matter, on an every night basis in the form of an email. It's going to prompt parents to answer a few questions about their child's any symptoms they may have, but also any temperature that they may have over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And that information will be immediately accessible to school administrators who are getting ready to welcome children at the start of the day. The app that we're going to be using for this will give us good real-time information about students that have completed the app. And as you can see, even on this screen, students that parents complete the question, and it will give students who have a cell phone a color-coded badge that they can show upon entry at school. We can scan it with a QR code reader, and it'll tell us that they completed the screening survey for the day. We're well aware that most elementary children don't come to school with a phone, and so the app allows us to print a list of students' names and a student-specific QR code that we can scan when the student arrives, and it will instantaneously tell us that the parents have completed the survey for the day. Any student that hasn't had their survey completed by their parents before school, we'll have a process for that too, to be able to take their temperature upon their arrival at school, but we're going to be strongly encouraging parents to take that step before they send their kids to school, partly because it helps facilitate a smoother entry to school for kids if they've already had that screening done, but also because it helps to prevent sending kids onto school buses or into proximity of other kids before those screenings have been accomplished. There will probably be some bugs for us to work out because this is a new app for us, a new iteration of the Crisis Go app, which we've used quite successfully. But we reviewed a number of products on the market, and this seems to be the one that's going to provide for us the most real-time data that we can use to not only manage the daily reporting, but because it's integrated with our student information system, in the event that we do have a student or a staff member that tests positive for COVID-19, it will help us with the contact tracing as well. So it seems to be quite versatile and robust, and we'll be sharing more information with parents in the next couple of weeks before we open school about how to use the app and how to complete the survey. So we'll send out lots of information in advance.
Yep. And Brian, just the next screen, I think, shows some samples of what a student's phone would look like. Michael, there we go.
So the system is color-coded. Any student, ideally, of course, showing up with a green badge on their phone would tell us that they've completed the survey and that they're free to come to school that day. Over on the right, it would tell us in gray that they hadn't yet completed the survey that day. That's helpful information, so we know to take their temperature when they arrive. The blue one to the left there is indicating to us that that's a day the student is scheduled for remote learning. And then over on the left-hand side, the at-risk category indicates that somebody had direct exposure to somebody who's positive with COVID-19 based on the questions they've answered. And the yellow or orange quarantine indication is that they've reported they have some symptoms related to to COVID-19. And of course, they'll get information depending on how they answer the questions about not coming to school and awaiting further information from the school nurse if the questions reveal a red or an orange response.
Thanks. Next slide, Michael. This is a mouthful right here. This is we've had a number of questions about how do you make sure you're implementing these protocols thoughtfully. They're very detailed. Brian, you want to just take us through this?
Sure. So we've been very busy actually for the last several months in the run up to our summer programs with students. We've been working on the implementation of our symptom protocol. And this is the protocol that we're going to be relying on if a student or a staff member presents with COVID-related symptoms during the school day. So we're still working with the Department of Health and our school physician to refine the criteria because as parents well know, kids can present with symptoms that obviously aren't necessarily related to COVID-19 on any given day in school. So we want to make sure that we're applying a careful lens to what may constitute COVID-related symptoms. And then for the nurses to have a really explicit protocol. And that includes not only the assessment of those symptoms and temperature checks, et cetera, but also ensuring that we have a designated isolation area within each school so that if a student or a staff member presents with a certain combination of COVID-related symptoms, we would isolate them until they could be picked up. Those isolation areas will be cleaned and disinfected. And of course, the nurse and the student or staff member that's feeling those symptoms will have the full benefit of all the PPE that we can provide. We have to report any suspected or confirmed case of COVID-19 to the Department of Health, and that's to facilitate the contact tracing that's required by a school district. And so we'll also take guidance from the Department of Health. It is actually the Department of Health that dictates and directs when somebody has to isolate or quarantine. We can refer a student or a staff member to be tested, but ultimately it is up to the Department of Health to direct somebody into quarantine or isolation. And of course, we will support and follow all of the guidelines that they provide. And then we're being careful about making sure that we've got clear lines of communication in the school. So we're going to have a COVID-19 liaison within each school that works directly with the school nurse, as well as with me as the COVID district coordinator. And I have a direct line to not only our school physician, but contacts at the New York State Department of Health as well. So it's very much about information sharing, but here it's first and foremost about managing symptoms that we may encounter to make sure kids and staff members are getting the appropriate care, and then taking the necessary follow-up to communicate with families while respecting privacy and following the guidance that we have from the Department of Health.
And Brian's moving very rapidly, but I just need to say, you know, what is so critical in this safety protocol is a tight chain of command and a clear line of communication. He's clearly established that. Just want to remind some of you folks at home, because the governor also in the press conference I referenced earlier said two other things. One was completely incorrect. He asked for school districts to define its protocols for testing. We do not have the authority to mandate anybody to be tested. That authority lives completely with the Department of Health. We bring them in, they determine who should be tested, who should be quarantined, the duration of that quarantine. So that's why the partnership with the Department of Health is so essential. They will leave it to the local authorities, that would be me and the school board, but primarily me, to decide if schools should be closed. Although obviously we believe they'll give us strong advice as to that recommendation. So thank you. I see the questions in the boxes. I just want to assure people that I will get to all of these questions. Brian, you should also look at those CDC questions and see as I move to the next slide if you want to come back and revisit them, okay?
Yep.
Okay. So the cleaning of facilities, and Bob's not with us tonight, but we are joined by Margaret Meduno, the treasurer, who has worked side by side with Brian, and at any point that I want to bring her into this to amplify something, or Margaret, if I leave something out, please just jump right in. So we have pretty tight protocols now. There have been some questions that have been directed at me about why aren't we closing for a deep cleaning day? The answer for that is pretty direct. You know, Mr. Salino is a very smart man. For many years ago, he changed the way in which our buildings are cleaned. And so we have full-time custodial crews well into the evening hours, 11 o'clock at the high school and middle school and 10 o'clock at the elementary school. So we don't require a full day of closure to do what others are calling a deep cleaning. I'm going to tell you specifically what that means. But we are redeploying our staff during the day to hit some of the high contact areas. They maintain these very detailed cleaning logs. Bob has gone out and purchased, I think we're up to 9, Margaret, or 10?
We're actually 10. There's 6 in-house, and we expect the other 4 to arrive shortly.
Yeah, so that's just a tremendous advantage to us. This device charges the cleaner with electromagnetic or electrostatic fields, and we saw some demonstrations, and it literally adheres to everything in the room, including the bottom of the desk. So our buildings will go through this entire process every night. So we'll go through a complete disinfection process every night. The touch points throughout the day will be cleaned as often as is possible. And you know that they're obvious. I'm not going to list them for you, the doorknobs and restrooms. And we only use products that we know are approved for this purpose, but also approved for school. So excuse me, folks, that's my clock. There we go. That's what happens when you Zoom from home. Margaret, is there anything else you wanted to add on that slide?
Just to add, to go along with the safety precautions, every classroom will have sanitizing wipes, spray disinfectants, pump handlers, and as you mentioned earlier, we already purchased 40,000 masks in the event that someone doesn't have one, and the paper desk coverings we may touch on a level. We'll have, in all schools, they'll have a sheet of paper to put on their desk, and those sheets of paper will be changed in between every class.
And thank you for bringing that up, because there was an appropriate criticism from a very knowledgeable parent in our community saying, why don't you just have the kids wipe down their desks, which we think is a great idea. But unfortunately, I go back to that first slide, we're not permitted under the guidance to direct students to sanitize their desk. By the way, high school students have been using our fitness center for years, and they go into the fitness center, Mr. Galano was nodding his head, and they would wipe down, just like you would in a public gym, the equipment. We're no longer permitted to do that. We can make them available, and if kids choose to do that in addition to covering their desks with this paper, we will absolutely permit them to do it, but we can't direct them to do it, so we couldn't plan for that. Next slide, Michael, please. So this is a hot button issue, and it's such an important issue, but we want to be clear that there's a limit to what we are able to do to improve ventilation. Unit ventilators are those big monster things that sit in classrooms. You often wonder what they do, and they just spin around. Well, they're actually bringing in outside fresh air on an ongoing basis. Most of them have been recently upgraded or repaired. We now have the ability, this is brand new, to keep a door open to a school classroom. That may be a surprise to you, but fire code typically does not permit that. So doors and windows can be open to increase cross ventilation. Mr. Solano is installing ceiling fans where there is limited or poor air circulation. And I don't fully understand this, so if Brian or Margaret want to talk about it, I got the tail end of Bob. I know we're doing this in every place that we have these non-window air conditioners.
Sure. Briefly to that, so there's fairly new technology. They're ion generators that can be added to the duct systems of non-window air conditioners. And there's a certain technology whereby the wave ion generator basically robs hydrogen from the molecular makeup of any bacteria, virus, or mold, and it effectively neutralizes it. And so as air passes through this system, it will effectively neutralize those contaminants in the air that's circulating in that room. We've purchased 100 of them, and we're going to start installing them in all of those systems. Important to say here that these typically are in Office spaces in libraries, in larger spaces like cafeterias, not typically in classrooms, but we're going to make sure that where they do exist, we will have them fully functioning with this technology.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to respond to some of the questions that have popped up about this topic. And we will be going into detail about the virtual option, but of course, if a child is quarantined, they can participate virtually if they're well enough. So please know that we obviously want to make kids, might make it easy for our students to access learning whenever possible. There was another question about a child being under the weather, which is a good question, by the way, and I'm so glad it came up. It came up multiple times. Brian, you want to just address that a little bit, because it's also something that you've talked with the nurses about. If a child is under the weather, not with COVID, we don't recommend they come to school, but would they be able to participate remotely? The answer to that is maybe. Go ahead.
Right, so we're going to be trying to manage the proper balance between learning in person and learning at home, and making the learning at home as available as we can to kids, students who are affected by COVID. It's going to be challenging to turn it on and turn it off on an instantaneous basis based on a student that's home with a cold on one day but back in school the following day. But we're working to try to refine those plans, in particular, making sure that we have, as I mentioned before, very explicit criteria when we would refer a student or a staff member for testing, and then we would seek guidance from the Department of Health about the duration of the quarantine or the isolation.
And I also want to, there will be a point at which I'm going to invite our teachers, and I will share with you that we need to be really mindful of what we think full virtual learning is in the hybrid environment. And we also need to be mindful of what we're asking of our teachers. This is a very challenging model to do well, and it is not the model that we prefer for a whole host of reasons, because even as you're experiencing us now, try to imagine being a teacher. You're teaching kids in front of you, and you're simultaneously teaching kids in a Zoom class in 12 unique environments. It's quite demanding from a planning perspective and in other ways, but we will talk about that as we get a little bit further on. We do not have the capability for negative air HEPA filters as far as I know. Okay, so here's the million-dollar question, and it's a good question. Will school close due to COVID-19 positive cases and test all who are in the building and families? How will testing be handled? Let me just turn the first part over to Brian, the second part to me. We can't mandate anybody get a test, just to be clear. Even if we think they should, we can recommend it, but we can't mandate it. So do you want to talk to Brian, the protocols for how schools will close?
Yes, best as I can. We've been informed by the Department of Health, as the superintendent mentioned at the outset, that the Department of Health won't close a school. It's not within their jurisdiction to dictate that schools must close at a certain point or at a certain threshold. They leave that to local decision by the superintendent in consultation with the New York State Education Department. We're actually awaiting specific guidance from the New York State Education Department to establish some basic criteria. How many positive tests within what period of time within a particular classroom or a particular school would result in a closure of a classroom or a school, or possibly even the whole district, depending on how widespread. That information and that guidance hasn't been released, and we expect that to be released to school districts, not just Harrison, but to all public schools sometime before the start of school. But frankly, has been one of the frustrations, that as we're trying to plan for the opening of school, and these are very legitimate questions that parents have, and we're waiting for clearer guidance to be able to answer that in a well-reasoned way.
And we'll get in some of the other particulars, but yes, to answer the question, every school will have at least one electrostatic cleaning device. The middle school and high school will have multiple. All right, if we go to the next slide, please, Michael.
That is, yeah, the promoting hygiene.
Yeah, so I think this is sort of self-explanatory, but I'll go through it anyway. Obviously, we're going to have signage to remind adults and students of what high quality self-protection is. Wash your hands, wear your masks, be mindful of maintaining social distance. We are going to have hand sanitizers placed throughout the building, but we are also going to have gallons of hand sanitizer in every classroom, so kids can clean their hands whenever they need to. Bob has been working with our maintenance crew all summer. We've added water bottle stations throughout the buildings. We're shutting off the water fountains, so we're encouraging kids to bring a container to refill or to bring water from home. And there have germ barriers, the things you see in stores, have been placed throughout our buildings already, and also in particular in the high school, where the high school faculty shares this very tight space on the upper level of our library. They've also been given germ barriers to protect them. Margaret, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
No, I think that covers everything.
Okay. Next slide, please, Michael. So I'm going to invite our principal, Kim Bukema, into the conversation here, and Larry and Lori, Larry Mastrota, our assistant principal, and Lori Griffo, our assistant principal. By the way, Larry, if I'm not wrong, this rainbow over Harrison High School, you're the photographer, is that right?
That is accurate.
That is an actual rainbow over Harrison High School over my shoulder there. So obviously we have lots of kids at Harrison High School, but we'll be cutting the population in half. So Kim, do you want to speak to this?
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Will, and nice to sort of see all of you tonight, to our parents and our faculty and our students that are watching. As far as the student entry and dismissal, we are rethinking how we have done it in the past. So we will have all of our students staggered exit off the bus. We will not just let the buses dump students off as normally as they come onto campus, but they would be dismissed one by one for students to come into the student union area. Students would be dispersed to multiple different locations depending on their grade level at that point in time. Right now we're working with our head of security on this plan and what that can look like. And our faculty would be entering through the main entrance of the building, whereas parent drop-off will occur now on the athletic side of the building. Students will also be parking. One nice perk for our students this year is that any student with a valid New York State driver's license may apply for a parking permit on campus. We're able to accommodate that with half of our students at school at any given time. And then at the end of the school day, we will be staggering the dismissal from classes, so not all the students will be exiting to the buses at the same time. As far as our lunches go, we will be cohorting students in the student union. What that looks like, right now the plan is to have 3 students at any lunch table, and they would be sitting in those groups. We'll be working with our student body to come up with that plan and get their input on what that can look like. At the end of the day, the decision will have to be based on what is in the best interest in terms of the health and safety of students. And then unfortunately, our food delivery and our leave privilege this year will no longer be able to occur.
Yeah, that won't be well received, I can promise you. Anybody else? Larry, Lori, is there anything you want to add to that particular slide? All right, let's move to the visitor orientation. Michael, I think that's where we are, right? So this is going to be a very different experience at every level, but at the high school in particular, where there are lots of visitors that come and go. So Kim, would you take us through that, please?
Sure. Well, primarily we're asking all visitors to call and make an appointment just to assure that we have the ability to accommodate you on your visit. Most of our appointments will be occurring virtually and accommodating students in that way. Besides our classrooms having webcams installed in them, most of our counselors, school counselors, administrators will all have those as well. So we'll be able to accommodate those quite easily with families. And in terms of the 9th grade orientation, that will still occur as planned on August 24th, but the biggest change to that is we're shortening the presentation, and we'll be bringing through 3 different cohorts of students. All of those 3 different cohorts, we have a very large freshman class coming through, will be divided into smaller groups by their school counselor, and then even in smaller groups for staggered tours of the building. So it'll be groups of 6 that are taking those tours of the building. Of course, all social distancing, mask wearing, all of that will be also applied to that event. We wanted to make sure that we had the opportunity before the first day of school to bring our 9th graders into the building and see what that looks like. For families that are choosing the virtual option or are not comfortable with sending their students that day, we will be also creating what we call a flipped video instructionally that we can post onto the website, so you would be able to access all of the information if you choose not to send your child to that event. Open houses will be done very similarly with a virtual flipped classroom video that your teachers will make, and anything that they would have told you on that night, they will be delivering to you in that message, and we will be posting those as well on the night that open house would have normally occurred. But obviously, you would be able to watch them at your leisure. You wouldn't have to watch them at that set time. All other events we're going to evaluate as they come. Obviously we like to accommodate as many as we can, maintaining the safety of our students and our families to have them in person. But in some cases, because of the size of the event, we won't be able to do that. And in that case, we would evaluate whether or not it would be appropriate to go to a virtual option for the event.
Right, and thank you, Kim. As I'm looking at the questions, many of them were answered, but there are a couple things. We did make a conscious decision to bring the 9th graders on campus for their orientation. We thought since it's a new building, it was critically important for them to do that. One of the questions is, where will students go if they have a free period? Larry or Laura, you want to respond to that?
Sure. So we're going to use the small gym as an area for students to be able to go to. We'll have desks in there, and they'll be able to socially distance, and that would be another area for students to go aside from the student union.
We also have the library, and today Kim and I were in the library with the library media specialist, and it looks like we can hold approximately 50 or so students in that space as well, socially distanced.
Great, thank you. I can let you know the names of the cleaning products we use. By the way, any cleaning product we use has to be approved by New York State Department of Education, and they have to obviously be effective for COVID-19. We will talk extensively coming up in a few minutes about buses. The assigned seating at the high school is one of those million-dollar questions. Do you let kids choose or not choose? I think you heard the principal say she's going to work as hard as she can to get kids to be involved to the extent that that's possible. And yes, you did hear right, only 3 kids per table. I can't answer your question about CO2 monitoring. I don't know the answer to that. We'll check into it. Any question we can't answer tonight, we'll look into. We've launched a brand new website that has a comprehensive FAQ. I'll be reviewing any of these questions that I think require more information. We will talk about the installation of webcams soon. And the question, will all the ventilation upgrades be done by the opening of school? The answer to that is yes. We will be talking about IB midterms, actually all midterms and exams, as we get into the academic portion of this. How does one, is good, I know this sounds like a funny question, but it's a good question. What about the bathrooms? Well, we're actually closing certain urinals and certain stalls. We've already walked all the bathrooms in all of the buildings, and we are going to have to monitor how kids go in and out. And also some of this is going to be teaching kids to obviously check themselves. And I know that seems like a leap of faith, but we're never going to get through this unless we teach kids well how to manage their own well-being in this environment. And there's one other question before we go back that I think warrants a thoughtful and deep answer. And it's a really good question, because I mentioned to you that they allow us to keep the doors open now. So the question is, what are we doing about drills to ensure the safety and well-being of kids? Well, there's a lot going on that front. So first and foremost, in a real emergency, you can forget about traffic flow. Everybody gets out of the building. Secondarily, we will be conducting drills with both the Husky and the Pride group to make sure everybody understands that. We go through annual fire inspections and checking. We're also looking at the type of, literally the type of door stops that we use so that they can never jam the door open permanently or damage the door. In addition to that, and this is a new one, I don't like talking about this, but there's a certain kind of drill that we do nowadays when we are afraid of outsiders coming into the building. That drill will not be performed in the way that it's typically performed. It will be reviewed. There will be materials shared, but we will not be pushing kids into close quarters in this time and place. So I hope that's responsive to most of your questions. We're going to try to keep up as best we can. I just want to say one other thing about orientation. You will hear this as a theme. 6th grade orientation, when we talk about it tomorrow night, will also be in person. Next slide, please, Michael. So I think this is a really important thing to pause and think about. There's a lot of noise in the press about how important it is to get kids back to school. And we would agree it's important to get kids back to school. It's also important to get teachers back to school. It's very important that we do that in a way that is safe. And we need to be mindful that the environment that they're returning to is nothing like the environment that they left. So that wonderful distant memory, which seems forever ago now that we had of school, for the moment is not what we're going back to. So we have planned a lot to try and help our faculty get reoriented as they return to school in these very unusual circumstances. So typically we have 2 superintendent conference days. Those are days where we focus on education and training. This time we're going to have 2 full days that will focus on the safe reopening of schools. We're going to let people tour the buildings, give them the same kinds of training that our nurses have. How do you recognize symptoms? We have our Director of Special Education, Julie Snyder's done a remarkable job of getting all of our psychologists trained in trauma-informed and trauma-responsive practices. So our faculty will be exposed to those ideas before school opens. Teachers will get back to their classrooms. In the case of the high school, maybe more than 1 classroom, to make sure their technology is set up, that they understand the landscape of the classroom and how it's changed in the world of social distancing. But in the next slide in a moment, I'm going to announce to you that we're going to delay the opening of school by 1 day. We'll make up that day in February because we do want the teachers to have 1 full day to build on the marvelous work that they did in the summer so that they are fully ready to teach for the first week of school. So there's also going to be a lot of focus on the social and emotional supports available to faculty, because as we all know, this is an extraordinarily emotional and draining experience for our faculty and staff. Next slide, please. So this is what I just mentioned. The first day of school for students will now be the 9th, and we will make that up by moving the scheduled superintendent's conference day, now scheduled for February 5th, to a full day of school. So essentially it won't change how much schooling students experience, but it'll give us a little more time to get all of our ducks in a row before we bring your children back. Next slide. This is a really important slide. I'm going to have Kim take you through this. Our students, just as our faculty, are returning to an environment that is alien to them and their notion of schooling. And we all need to remember how much that is going to challenge them when they first get here. So, Kim? You're muted for some reason.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
Magic of Zoom. Students are going to be oriented to these new safety protocols. Obviously, all of this is as new to them as it is to us. So we'll be working on making some flipped videos for them. Obviously, we can't bring them together as our traditional class meetings we've done historically. So these would be done in their smaller classrooms, watching a video going through each of the different protocols that are new to them this year. We'll also be sending some of these out in advance so students really know like what to do right when they get off the bus. And you know, we're working hard making some fun videos before the opening of school. And in terms of the training, all of these pieces for mental health, all of that information are going to be embedded within that, so students know where those resources are or how to reach out for them if they require that. Also on the opening days of school, our teachers will be getting some training around that as well, so they can help be advocates for students in that area. And, you know, obviously if students are exhibiting any signs of, you know, feeling uncomfortable in school, all of those things, we have plenty of support staff to help them through that throughout a day's.
Great. Anything else to add, anybody? Julie, is there anything you want to add at this point?
I think that's good.
Okay. Next slide, please, Michael. So this slide I am particularly proud of because I think it speaks to the level of commitment that the organization has to planning ahead. I remember, it says May, June at the bottom of this timeline, but back in April, I was checking my notes today, was the first time I met with the cabinet. And at that point, we didn't know if our summer program would be virtual or in person. And it was our mantra then, we need to use these next few months to plan for next year. Here's what we learned, and it's not a surprise. I'm sure many districts learned this. I have among the finest faculty ever assembled. These are remarkable teachers, but let's remember what they experienced. They were thrown into a new dynamic, many of them not well versed in all of the technology necessary to be effective in the virtual environment. They had no time to plan. Kids were sometimes engaged, sometimes not, despite our best efforts. And what we needed to do was prepare for what I thought would be our eventuality. And I'm just going to be very blunt. I don't think schools will be open consistently. I hope that they are. But our mindset was, how do we figure out, based on our own research, what is the best way to prepare our organization? How do we redesign not only our professional development, but our summer programs to address two concerns: the learning gap that kids experienced, but also build a broader base to serve kids, and use those 700 students as a way to field test what is the most effective way to teach in either a hybrid or virtual model. So I commend my assistant for instruction, Mr. Greenfield. He developed with the team 70 professional development courses, 1,400 registrations. So most teachers were taking multiple courses to get better at this work. We also simultaneously realized that the curriculum as it's currently constructed does not lend itself so well to synchronous and asynchronous learning. And so the entire team, along with teachers, spent over 1,000 hours redesigning curriculum. The elementary program has over 500 lessons already prepared, and we're about to engage in another 500 hours before school opens. So we're excited about that. Teachers took that work and they field tested it with our own kids. And if you've had some children in our summer programs, you know that the experiences that your children had were vastly different, and the feedback has been very positive. So the implementation phase in the learning lab was successful, and now we are ready to move forward and try this out in our hybrid model. And during this September month, we will be collecting data from you. We'll be surveying you at this 2-week mark, the 4-week mark, and the 10-week mark to see how we adjust, fix, shift. So there's been an awful lot that's occurred behind the scenes that you understandably don't necessarily see or know about, but we have engaged the entire organization basically since mid-May in retraining themselves, becoming expert, field testing, looking at best practice, and preparing teachers to be more effective in what will be a hybrid or virtual learning environment going forward. But Michael, I should give you a chance to add to that, because that's so much of the good work that you led with the team.
Dr. Will, I think you captured the essence of what we're trying to communicate to the public. When we went into an emergency remote learning, it was a very different environment. And we're as confident as an organization can be that beginning 4 months ago, we started planning for what hybrid learning would look like, and came to a determination that the model that would best serve students would be smaller class sizes, alternating days, and a redesigned curriculum that maximized the instructional model, which includes a day of live in-person instruction followed by asynchronous learning, which we're calling learning from home, which capitalizes and builds upon the learning from the prior day and reinforces and prepares students for the learning that is to come on the following day. That's how we've prepared, And that's what we started to build, and that's what we conducted action research during this summer to prepare for. And that's what we have a great deal of confidence in being prepared for opening. Now, certainly that included the summer programs that Dr. Wool outlined. And just to highlight, over 700 students participated. We had 12 programs that we were designed around enrichment in math, language arts, a humanities program in science. We ensured and continued the program that we've always had to ensure that students who need credit recovery and have not passed all their courses, or for some reason or another didn't earn the credit necessary to graduate, were given the opportunity to earn those credits, and they were very successful thanks to the hard work of all the teachers this summer. We continue to run our AP World, IB Economics, extended essay, and college essay workshops virtually this summer. So we learned a tremendous amount about how students learn, what works in these environments, and we were going to apply that to the hybrid learning model in the forthcoming. Our special education program continued to run, and it continued to run on site for students who have disabilities that needed the kind of attention, and a credit to our special education director, Julie Snyder, Antonia Sameo, the assistant to the director, and the teachers for building that program, putting it in place in short order. We ran an English language learner program that has been in effect for almost 6 or 7 years, and we maintained that and ran it virtually during the summer for K-12. I think there were almost 70 students involved in that program. And thanks to the instructional team, we built a Learning from Home Summer Resources website to provide additional support to those who couldn't participate in the extended learning options in the program, in the enrichment, or in the academies that ran.
Yeah, that's a proud moment. In talking with so many of the teachers who were teaching all of those courses virtually, they learned so much, which was invaluable to us. All of these courses were hand developed literally in the summer by our very brilliant faculty.
And we're joined this evening, Lou, by several teachers. Actually all three taught in this summer program in one or other of these programs. And so they bring their expertise to this conversation about how we build an effective model. And keep in mind that this has never been done before in schools. We were put into an emergency situation, and then building a hybrid program out of a curriculum that was designed for 100% in-person learning is to mobilize this in a period of 2 to 3 months is nothing short of astounding. And we think we're as close as anyone to confidently putting this program in place. The professional development, as you outlined, we had between 70 and 75 online workshops. And these were run by external folks who have expertise, but primarily by our internal leadership team and faculty. And this was an exercise in active, authentic action research. We brought expertise, we learned, we adjusted, we adapted, and teachers learned together and developed the strategies and figured out what works in our classrooms. As you pointed out, we invested in curriculum. Just to be clear, when a teacher develops a 45-minute lesson and you see that and a student experiences that lesson, it could take anywhere from 3 to 5 hours just to design and outline a lesson that's of high quality. So we knew that teachers needed time, and so we invested more than 1,000 hours, and that was phase 1. And phase 2, we're investing an additional 500 to 700 hours in curriculum writing, so teachers have the support and the opportunity to develop curriculum that meets the standard that we all hold for our organization.
Thank you, Michael. There was a couple of questions that I think would be worth just talking about for a minute. Kelly Malchewski is our Director of Guidance, and there's an interesting question in there, and I know we always do such a good job of inviting students new to our community in. There's a question in the bank about my child will be new this year as an 11th grader. Typically, that comes through the guidance office, Kelly. So can you want just to talk a little bit about that?
Sure, no problem. Very similar to the 9th grade orientation, we also host a new student and family orientation every year. So that will actually be next week, Wednesday. It's on the district calendar, and all new families will receive communication about that. So you'll absolutely get more information the next couple of days, and we welcome you, and we hope to see you next week.
Thank you. And Dr. Tyler, in your multitude of roles, probably the most successful IB program in this region, I don't know if you noticed, there's a question in there about IB exams. And you want to just talk about really who sets the parameters under these conditions, you know, for how they're administered and all of that stuff?
Sure. So the IB organization itself will set the parameters of if an exam will be given, how scores will be generated from the assessments that the students will do. So there has been no information elicited about the upcoming May exams that will occur in May 2021, besides kind of compacting some of the assessments. And teachers have been apprised of which assessments will be compacted at this point. Now that could change, like it did change this year, where the IB eventually went to primarily using the internal assessments for students in those courses to generate grades. And actually, there was a change just released this morning about how the grades will be calculated for our May 2020 cohort. So students have been apprised of those changes as well.
And it's worth noting as an example that, and the social studies teacher, Mark, and our director of social studies, Marlene Colonna, will be speaking to this, but the IB's changes include adapting for this year and recognizing that the assessments, the expectations for assessment need to be adapted in light of the expectation of hybrid learning. And so they have made some adjustments that we are appreciative of, but they are, you know, sort of catching up to this virus and catching up to the challenges. And so we expect additional changes to be forthcoming. We also note that the College Board released information just this week that informs us that under most circumstances, the AP exams are expected to be administered traditionally and fully. They modified the College Board modified the AP exams for the May administration and put an online version of them in place and shortened them, condensed them considerably. From what we know right now, the College Board is going back and planning for a traditional AP exam in May of 2021.
And you will hear more about this. This is the reason I wanted Dr. Tyler to weigh in on this is that last year was probably about the worst circumstance you could ever find yourself in. IB was late giving guidance, but the faculty at the high school did just an incredible job of stewarding the kids through consistently uncharted territory. And most of our kids did just splendidly well. And I know this is not something where I just say, trust us. I'm not saying trust us, but know that we are staying so tightly on top of these things that as these changes unfold, we will be sharing them with you. You'll hear more later from Kelly Malchewski about some of the things we're doing to get out in front of the SAT debacle and all of those things that have just made it impossible. We have a whole bunch of seniors, as do most folks, who haven't been able to take the SAT or the ACT, but we do have some plans for that. Next slide, Michael, I think this is you.
I was muted, I apologize. We recognize that there's a process for design, and we just wanted to make sure that the public understood that we're taking a research-based approach. We've been thorough, we've been meticulous, Everything we've done has been planned and by design, and the part that is so important is that we revisit and redesign our curriculum and our instructional model for this new set of circumstances that we've been building for.
Before you leave that, if you wouldn't mind, just to go back, because I want to address one of the questions. One of the questions was, why don't the teachers just teach half the class live and the other class virtually? If we thought that was effective, we would have recommended it. We don't think it's effective. We field tested it, and it's very difficult for even the most amazing teacher to fully engage 22 or 24 kids in a simultaneous virtual and in-person environment. And so I think what is important here, there are lots of words on this excellent representation, like synchronous and asynchronous, and everybody is hyper-focused on, when my student is home, I want real-time instruction. What we learned was that wasn't always the most effective thing. What we didn't have last year, which is a tremendous advantage this year, is your kids will be getting in-person instruction from our outstanding faculty. And the work that they're doing with that faculty will be linked directly to the asynchronous day. That wasn't what occurred last year, and it will make a tremendous difference. And that's why we spent so much time on the research, planning, and development of curriculum and curriculum design. So
exactly, the level of structure and planning that has gone into preparing for the fall will make an enormous difference in students' experience. And we had great success under crisis circumstances. Now we've had 4 months to plan and redesign. And with that in mind, we keep reminding the public that that's how the hybrid model has been designed. And we have built for the live instruction on alternating days.
Yes. And I'm just going to, before we run through some of these questions, we are going to take you through in a minute what a typical day would look like. So that should answer a lot of your questions. You did hear correctly that it's 50% of the class. Depending on our classes, they range from 22, sometimes 24, but typically it would be half the class in. And no, we don't do anything alphabetically, because we literally hand select and balance our classes carefully by gender, by ability level, by interest. There are a whole host of variables that would not fit under a simple alphabetized mechanism. So no, we don't do that. Chris, can you speak briefly to the IB orientation, how that might happen this year? Dr. Tyler, that little red button is still active.
Sorry about that. I keep on forgetting. Yeah, so the 24th and 25th of next week, we'll have an online IB orientation for students, and it will primarily concern itself with getting off to a good start with the extended essay and the CAS. So students will receive some information, some Zoom invites soon.
Okay, so it is coming, and we are aware of it. We are very mindful that kids need to be oriented, and especially in this environment. So we're going to attend to that. Before I turn it over to Kim, I can answer this question because I know she did this by hand. Siblings will be on the same team if that's what you requested. There were some parents that requested that not be the case because they don't want all their children home on the same day, which we thought was very interesting. As well, if you have a middle school and a high school student, you can also request, and we are likely be able to accommodate that those children will be on the same day. Unfortunately, the elementary model follows a different model, so siblings at the elementary level will be on the same day, but it won't necessarily coordinate with the secondary schools. So I'm going to ask Principal Bukema to take us through the typical hybrid instructional model. This is over a 10-day period, right, Kim?
This is over a 10-day period that's up there. That's correct.
Okay.
A couple of questions that came up on some things that we addressed earlier. Yes, students will be allowed to continue to go to the library. They will be encouraged to go during their free periods to some of our outdoor spaces, in addition to obviously still having this small gym. our outdoor spaces are all contingent on the weather, but we have some lovely spots where students can take advantage of to have a study spot at a nice table that sits outside, that's an outdoor table. So we do still have a resource officer who will be available to us this school year as well, was a question that came up. And then in terms of addressing our students, they should be looking at their email every single day. While we don't communicate with them daily, there will be a lot of information now starting to go out, given that the start of the school year is right upon us, starting from having class meetings, which will be occurring as early as this week. So students should be watching for that. But also, again, those flipped videos that will give some further information about what it looks like to, be in this model this upcoming school year. So we will definitely be communicating with them. So if you see up on your screen here, we have the hybrid instructional model. We have students divided into 2 teams, a Pride team and a Husky team. Dr. Wool already addressed how those teams are going to be comprised in terms of students on them, but it is not an alphabetical split. So students on day 1 of school, if you follow this plan along, if school, the first day of school was on a Monday, which it's not, it's on a Wednesday, but this is a given week. If it were a day 1, they would be in school for their on-site learning in a traditional 9-period scheduled day. They would be following their day that day. The opposite day on Tuesday, they would be in their asynchronous learning. The Husky team would be doing absolutely the opposite of what they are doing on those days. If you notice in this schedule, day 1 occurs twice because students have to have the opportunity in both groups to do their day 1. So if you are taking a class every other day, you would have the opportunity to do that, like our health classes, our PE classes, our lab classes. Each group will have that experience. And if you're sitting at home on an asynchronous day and it's a day 1 day, you would be doing assignments for those classes that meet on day 1. You wouldn't be doing assignments for a class that only meets on even days, let's say. And that pattern would just continue to foul over the course of like those 2 weeks and beyond. If for some reason school did not occur on one of the days, the calendar would still continue to move forward in this pattern.
The other thing I wanted to say about that just before we change slides. So we've gotten a lot of questions. Other schools are doing things differently. We thought on the days that kids were in person, changing classes and experiencing a normal school day was part of social and emotional well-being. So going to all of your courses, not just the core academic courses. So that was a conscious choice on our part to try to replicate normalcy wherever we could for our kids.
Sure. We also have 237 unique courses at Harrison, so it's very difficult to cohort students. Every student has a very personalized pathway at the high school. They don't sit in the same group of classes. So even 9th graders come in and they have unique choices that they make that would make their schedule different than another 9th grader. And that also addresses the question about lunches. While it would be nice to be able to have lunch with any given friend, you might not have lunch the same period, and that might be impossible given their individual course choices.
And I'm going to circle back to what happens when kids change classes. So the regulations do not permit us to have children clean their own desk, but there'll be wipes in every room, paper towels, cleaning supplies as well as full sheets of what we call newsprint that a child can take and cover their entire desk. And at the end, they'll place that piece of paper in a pile and be collected at the end of the day. So we're doing everything we can to comply and make it as safe as we can for your children. I think next slide, Michael. Kim, I think you're going to take us through what a typical learning from home day would be like. This is the day that your children are asynchronously learning for the most part. There are some synchronous experiences, and Kim's going to talk to you about that.
Sure. So a student, to address the virtual student, so a student who chooses a full virtual experience will still follow what a student who's in the hybrid model would have. So their in-person on-site days, they would be zooming into the classroom, where the student who's chosen to be on-site would be there in person in that classroom. And then on the opposite days, if they're both, let's say, in the Pride group, they would be doing their asynchronous instruction, just like the students who are in the hybrid model. The virtual model will also be that same grouping pattern. So on those asynchronous days when students are learning from home, they will be doing, as it reads there, teacher-developed student-directed learning experiences throughout each of the content areas building upon prior learning. So what that looks like is that we use a Google classroom as our platform. Many parents in the audience are familiar from seeing that in the spring when we were in the virtual environment, that was the major area that teachers would go to post all of their work, make announcements, even, just post check-ins with their students. What the work looks like on any of those given days, the content specialist, our directors will be addressing a little bit further on, so I won't spend a lot of time on that. But we also have synchronous opportunities that students will be able to either work with one another in small groups that the teachers would help to design, so that they would be doing that work instead of doing it in the classroom, because you can't bring small groups together. They would be doing that type of work on their asynchronous days while they're sitting at home and meeting with one another. Students will also be able to engage in many different support services, both in person and also synchronously on their days they're learning from home. As you can see, there are students who are in our IVDP program that do our CAS projects. If we could go back one more slide, our CAS projects, our extended essay, both of those. MYP project is new to our 10th graders this year. They began it last year in the spring as 9th graders. Those meetings with their advisors will also occur through a synchronous Zoom with their advisor that's already been selected for them. And then any of our lessons in music will also be designed through on asynchronous learning at home days. So students can be in the classroom and not pulled for those, but it would follow the normal cycle that we do in terms of lesson design. So they would be experiencing as many of those as they've done in the past. And of course, any of our extracurricular activities, it's if a day you're in school and they're meeting after school, you would attend in person. And if you're at home, they would be Zooming you in. So if, for instance, you meet every Tuesday, it would give both groups the opportunity to be in person and at home, or fully at home if that's the option that they choose. And then one of the,
if I can just point something out, I mean, there are a couple of questions that from parents about the term synchronous and the term asynchronous. We use the term synchronous to describe learning that happens in a moment in time. It can be online or it can be live. Typically, when we're using synchronous office hours, for example, we're talking about online synchronous, which means a Zoom conference call. When we refer to asynchronous, we are talking about a project, an assignment, or a learning activity that occurs not in the moment in time, but could happen with a given deadline. And that is typically the kind of learning that occurs on the day that is alternating.
Right. Synchronous in simple terms means you're having a live interaction of some kind, either in person or virtually. And as Michael said, asynchronous is built out on that. We have tried to build in some real live experiences for kids on the days they're not learning from home by providing teacher office hours or check-ins. So if a student is struggling with the work they learned the day prior, or they want to do something more, they have the ability to check in with their teacher.
And if I could just add, because I know we mentioned this early on, that something that was very important from the outset when we were coming up with our plan was that because based on everything we are seeing in school districts around the country that have opened, when we have to switch our entire district to a fully virtual model, so no one is coming to school, we wanted that transition to be seamless. We wanted students to, the days that they would have been in school, we wanted those days at home to be face-to-face, Zooming with teachers in classrooms with their, the cohort they are learning with. So that if one day the determination is made that it is not safe for students or faculty or anyone else to be in a school, we literally just jump to virtual learning. And it will feel the same for students, the experience. They won't have to think about, is this a day when I'm seeing teachers? Is this a day when I'm doing more of my learning from home? And I think it's also worth reminding, we've talked about this quite a bit at Board of Education meetings, that the reason for this day on, day off model is because 24 people, and we can see it now. I can't even see all of the participants, the panelists in this at one time on my computer screen. It's simply not feasible for a teacher to be engaging in this kind of a model on a computer screen with 22 or 23 or 24 students. we would be setting ourselves up for, and our students up for, failure.
I think that, you know, you make a really fine point, and I just want to underscore, because we're going to talk about this very honestly and openly about the downsides of virtual versus hybrid, because there are some, and you'll hear from our expert teachers, and the three teachers that are joining us tonight are truly expert, the challenges that this model poses. So one of the things that Kelly mentioned, and it's really important, we designed this model in May believing schools were going to go back into quarantine. And we will not revert to a full class model when they do, because we want teachers to be effective and we want your kids to be truly engaged. Very different than sitting passively in front of a screen. And there's a number of questions floating around about siblings. Yes, you will be surveyed again. And if you want your siblings on the same team, that's what 99% of the folks want. That's what we'll try to accomplish. All right, next slide, please, Michael. So this is basically a clarification of.
Lou, I'm going to turn this over to Miss Colonna and to speak to this.
Yeah, there's some really important things here. And Marlene, when you get to the flipped classroom, there was a question earlier. Just describe it a little bit.
Sure.
Thanks.
Sure. The directors and I would like to take a few minutes to explain the design process behind the hybrid model. The model was designed to maximize the effectiveness of both synchronous face-to-face instruction, whether that be in person or that be virtual through a Zoom or a Google Hangout, and to maximize the benefits of asynchronous or independent learning that can take place from home. Essentially, when we think about the typical 45-minute period, 6 through 12, there's three types of learning that generally occur in the classroom. There's teacher-directed and facilitated learning, teacher guidance and modeling. There's peer learning and collaboration. And then there's a significant amount of time that students are given to practice, right? To try to use and transfer some of the knowledge that they've received. On the synchronous day, some of the peer collaboration will take place, but most of the independent learning will be moved to the asynchronous day. That's the day when students are learning from home and they have the ability to practice the knowledge that they had learned the day before. This is not review and it's not homework. It's an extension of the knowledge from the day before. The advantage of having students practice in the classroom with their teacher is substantial. The teacher is there to answer any questions. The teacher is there to redirect. Most of the time, the teacher is just there to reassure kids that they're on the right track. For this type of learning to be successful in an at-home environment on the asynchronous day, our teachers have worked tremendously to put in place digital scaffolds and supports for students so that much of that can still take place. For example, teachers have recorded themselves giving a lecture so that teachers can see, that students at home can see the lecture over again. Teachers have recorded frequently asked questions where they've tried to anticipate where the students might have trouble with the assignment and have themselves recorded actually providing those answers. Teachers have amassed exemplar papers of proficient and distinguished examples so that a child who's not really sure if they're on the right track has a model that they can follow while they're working from home. And of course, there's going to be extra help so students can still check in with their teachers if they need assistance. There are obvious benefits to being face-to-face, and that is what we would certainly all prefer. But there are also some benefits to independent learning from home. Some of those are that it allows the students to go at their own pace. If the teachers tape their lecture or there's a video, I can stop the video, I can watch it over again. If I already know the information, I can kind of speed through it and get on to something else. There's greater choice, greater agency in learning from home. For example, students will have an opportunity maybe to investigate something that they had been interested in the day before and do a deeper dive as part of their at-home day. And then it allows students to practice those career and college readiness skills of independent learning. Things like organizing yourself in time and space, sticking to a schedule, navigating online resources for media literacy. Students are going to be practicing all of these important skills, but not in a vacuum and not alone, because their teachers are going to provide them with lots of support and scaffolding. And on days where they're face-to-face, teachers will also be explicitly teaching these skills. When we think about some of the asynchronous learning, a flipped classroom is simply the teacher taping themselves, giving the lecture so that the students can watch that lecture at any pace that they want to. They can see it many times or they can speed through it. Student-driven inquiry would be an example of independent learning, where kids are investigating something that they had learned the day before and now they want to do a deeper dive. And reflection, you know, could be journaling. It's at the end of the unit where kids are setting goals, maybe potentially for the next unit, and evaluating themselves as independent learners in the at-home environment. I know that our directors, Jamie Cantor, the director of ELA, and Veronica DeAndrea are going to go into much greater depth about how the activities that were chosen for asynchronous days were very purposefully aligned to the learning goals in the current curriculum to make sure that we would be able to get through as much of the curriculum in the same kind of depth that we were able to do before. I know it appears that the kids are going to be doing half the learning because they're only going to be in school half the time, but nothing could be further from the truth. The days that they're home, they're continuing that learning. So I'll turn this over to the other directors, and we also have some fabulous examples from some of our teachers of exactly what a typical week might look like.
Thank you, Marlene. That was excellent. And just a pause. Everything comes back to the work that this group of professionals did in the summer. So I don't want you to lose sight of everything is connected to everything else. So if we hadn't done the curriculum compacting, brought our teachers in, done this field testing, all the things Marlene is talking about would have not been possible. Asynchronous or independent learning has to be of the highest quality in order for it to be meaningful work. So who's up next? Whose slide is this?
I am. Thank you, Dr. Will.
Good evening, Dr. Cantor. How are you tonight?
Good, thank you. Jumping on to what you just said, this summer our teachers have begun to design their in-school synchronous and asynchronous learning from home experiences for students. When they plan for these asynchronous experiences, they're considering these ideas. Firstly, they're thinking about that clear link between what's happening in school, those synchronous learning goals and outcomes, and the asynchronous experiences. They're also thinking about student engagement. They have begun to design highly engaging activities that value student choice and opportunities for students to share their thinking. Tasks are also created that require students to think critically, create, evaluate, and analyze all the components of academic rigor. And furthermore, the asynchronous learning is designed to include collaboration, where students are connecting with their peers on these learning from home days, to interrogate ideas, to engage in dialogue, to continue those conversations from the classroom. And lastly, these asynchronous tasks are purposeful and they're intentionally created for a particular learning goal. And that's really important, and Veronica's going to speak about that intentionality.
Great.
Thank you. Good evening. As Dr. Will mentioned, our teachers have dedicated countless hours in preparing for the fall through professional development and summer programming. And as an outgrowth of our summer programs, we've learned that high quality asynchronous learning can take on different forms. For instance, asynchronous experiences can be designed to activate prior knowledge or make connections to previous learning. Asynchronous learning can also be in the form of direct instruction, having students learn a new concept or skill through a flipped, or as Marlene mentioned, pre-recorded lesson. We found that students can deepen their understanding of a concept through a virtual exploration, and many of our teachers have been able to prototype that this summer. In addition, our teachers have found it valuable to include opportunities for students to reflect and self-assess asynchronously through the use of a variety of platforms that we've learned about. Throughout the summer, teachers have been able to design hybrid units of study that think deeply about which learning goals need to be taught in person and identify the best opportunities for those asynchronous learning experiences that will take place at home. And as teachers plan for asynchronous learning, they have been very intentional with designing experiences that are both engaging and interactive for our students. They're collaborating to design meaningful experiences that connect both in-person and at-home learning.
I think too, one of the things you said, Veronica, and I know Chris, Dr. Tyler and I were talking about this just the other day, it's the teacher's job is always difficult. This has made it exponentially more difficult. And so it is more important than ever that teachers have the opportunity to connect and share their best practice so that not everybody is pushing this enormous rock up the hill. but I think we're shifting now to a week at a glance for ELA. Is that right? Jamie, before you get started, a couple of quick questions I just want to run through. At some point, we're going to tell you how we're managing labs. I promise you we will get there. But there was a question, I think it's very basic, but it's an important question. And Larry, Lori, Kim, and I have discussed it at length. So what happens when a child just doesn't follow the rules of wearing a mask? So we'll just take a brief pause there, and I don't know which of the three of you want to address that, but we have a plan.
Sure, it's been added to our code of conduct for this upcoming school year that mask wearing is required. Obviously, it's a danger to the health, welfare, and safety of others if they don't. In addition to that, it's insubordination. It is a required thing, so it would be handled as a discipline incident. They would be meeting with Larry, Lori, Mrs. Griffo, Mr. Mastroda, or myself if that were the case, and we would make a determination on the appropriate consequence.
That's right. And one of the things we're going to try very hard not to do is reward kids by suspending them for not wearing a mask. We're going to take them to a secluded place that's supervised and have them continue with their work while wearing a mask, because we do think what is so important for all of us. If we don't behave like a community that cares about one another, we're going to put each other at risk, and that is not going to be acceptable behavior. So our code of conduct has been modified to reflect that. But this is one thing I've been waiting for. This is very exciting to me as a former English teacher. Dr. Ladwig is a former English teacher. Mr. Greenfield is a former English teacher. And we all wish we had Leah Moore as an English teacher at one point in time. And Jamie, I don't know who's going to lead this, but let's talk about a week of ELA in the Mice and Men unit of study. And it's Steinbeck to boot. Hooray.
Leah's going to share with us how she organized this unit of study.
All right. Hi, Leah.
Hi, everybody. Good evening.
Thanks for doing this.
Of course. So looking at a week of an ELA class, we would plan our in-person and asynchronous experiences to engage, explore, and enhance learning. So what you're looking at is a week of a unit studying of mice and men, where the larger essential question is looking at unwritten rules in society. This particular week would be focusing on the skill of annotation and the different texts with which we could do that. So I'll walk you through what a week would look like. So this group here would start with an asynchronous lesson, and they would preview the material about the 1930s. What do they already know about the 1930s? And then using Edpuzzle, which is a program that calculates and shows me the responses of the students, they would analyze an excerpt from a documentary called Riding the Rails about the migrant workers in the 1930s. Then the next day, the students would come in class, and there would be direct instruction using the new historicism lens to learn more about the life of John Steinbeck and how his life and living during the 1930s impacts the text. The following day would be asynchronous again, using that flipped lesson where students then are watching a video where I'm teaching them. They would implement the annotation skill of understanding characterization and indirect characterization to analyze the first chapter of Mice and Men, specifically the characters of Lenny and George. The following day in class, I would check that information, make sure they were okay, and then we would apply that to another text, which we have already studied in the course of the year, called The Danger of a Single Story by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, and they would analyze the single stories that Steinbeck is implementing in the text. And then on Friday, they would have an opportunity to have an online Socratic dialogue to talk about to what extent Steinbeck is interrupting or perpetuating those single stories, specifically about migrant workers, African Americans, women, individuals with intellectual disabilities as well.
Wow, sign me up. That looks like a great lesson. And I just want to take a pause there to see how deep the work is on the asynchronous days. It really does build so beautifully on the work that the teacher is doing in the classroom. So I'm excited to see that. Thank you. Anything more to add there, Jamie, to that?
No.
Any questions from board members? Okay, good.
I just would like to remind everyone, because we have gotten a lot of questions and comments, that our website is filled with information about all of this. And in addition, this meeting, this presentation, pretty much everything we are putting out in these meetings or to the public lives on our website. So I encourage people, I know we're sharing a lot tonight, but all of it is accessible and can be reviewed. And as we said, for people who weren't able to participate in the meeting, they will be able to watch it on the website.
Yes, and also I think I would also say that a lot of the questions about COVID-19 are comprehensively answered on the FAQ and some other prior slides. So we won't come back to it right now, but the answers are available. We have a brand new website called our reopening website. We sent it to you. It's on our homepage. When you go in, it'll pop up and you just click, it'll take you there. All right, next slide, please.
Hello, I'm Kristen, and I'm going to walk you through a week at math. I taught 2 summer programs over the entire summer, and that really helped experience a lot in determining how to engage students asynchronously. In math, asynchronous work is really useful for introducing content and showing prior knowledge. It's also really useful for individualizing learning material for specific students and assessing student understanding. So here's a week which combines synchronous and asynchronous learning opportunities. You'll see how each activity has been thoughtfully planned to enhance the prior day's learning. So we start off the week by introducing the concepts of vertical and horizontal lines through a pre-recorded Edpuzzle video. And Edpuzzle videos are great because students have access to the lesson with embedded self-assessment questions that the teacher can also see. So both students and teacher are receiving feedback on the student's knowledge of the concept before even meeting in person. The following day, when students meet in person, the teacher has the opportunity to not only review the previously taught concept from the Edpuzzle video, but also to teach a new concept of writing the equation of a line and slope-intercept all in one lesson. By Wednesday, we're back to asynchronous, and the material planned on that day will support students' understanding of both concepts. The provided videos support students in completing the task independently. Then in Thursday, we're back to in-person, and students can complete an MYP performance task on real-world examples of these concepts. And finally, we conclude our week back to virtual, where students will have asynchronous assignments to self-assess so that teachers can give feedback by moving on to before moving on to new material. And there are many interactive platforms that all us teachers took for professional development over the summer to really help us pick the best ways to check in and learn about where students are at that time virtually.
That was excellent, Kristen. I love the tool where kids are teaching themselves and you get a pre-assessment set of results, because it really gives you vital information on how to frame the next lesson. And it kind of addresses the last question that just popped up. Kristen is actually describing what an asynchronous day would look like. It wouldn't necessarily have defined parameters as to when the student does the work. They could do that on their own time. The check-ins obviously are scheduled, but other than that, the student is expected to work independently, building out on the work that was done either the day prior or the day after. So,
what I would add to that is that the design of the asynchronous time isn't without accountability. It is with various sorts of accountability, including synchronous check-ins, including tools that help teachers to monitor students' learning and make sure that they're getting it and they're completing it. And and teachers have this very much in mind as they plan, and this is why we presented the weekend glance as opposed to thinking about it as a daily instruction. There's more than a week in the plan, but this is a way to think about learning in this model.
Yeah, that's very well said, Michael. And Kristen, thank you for doing this tonight as well, and for your participation in the summer. And it's helpful for parents, because I just need to say this out loud. We all need to be mindful that what we ask of our teachers is sustainable and doable. And the amount of planning that it takes to build this design is exponentially greater than it is to do typical in-person teaching, because you're really building extension lessons every other day. And so what the teachers have done so magnificently is to see these big concepts, to put them in the frame of a unit, and then break them down into lessons. And as Veronica said, analyze which concepts are best taught in person, which are best explored independently. So I just want to say to folks, I know our expectations, but understand, if you are a teacher, what we're asking of our teachers is vastly different and far more difficult than it's ever been. And they are rising to this occasion in amazing ways. So thank you.
One other point, Kristen used the term MYP, and for those of you who don't know what that is, the International Baccalaureate Middle Years program, we are in our authorization year, and frankly, I'm very proud of the organization. We haven't lost a step. We are still scheduled for our authorization virtual visit in December of this year, and that's a tentative schedule. But the point I'm making is that teachers are maintaining their focus on the long term while they're focusing and redesigning curriculum for the shorter term, which are the conditions that we're currently working under.
Thank you. And next slide, please.
And we turn it over to Ms. Colonna and Mr. Treebach.
Please, welcome. Thanks for doing this, Mark.
Thank you, Dr. Wall. So the spring semester gave me the opportunity to learn what works in an asynchronous environment. The major takeaway is that students need to feel supported even when I'm not standing next to them. With technologies like Zoom, Edpuzzle, and email, students can have an individualized education. This slide outlines an IB Economics SL sample week. During this week, students will ascertain how prices are determined. For example, on Monday of this week, students will analyze non-price determinants of supply and demand. They will work together in groups using Google Docs to apply their knowledge to real-world examples. On Tuesday, students will learn the information and incentives that are disseminated by changing prices. They will watch videos of me and answer questions through Edpuzzle. Edpuzzle's analytics allow me to know before class starts on Wednesday which content students struggled with. Wednesday will follow the same format as Monday, with data sets instead of news extracts as the source material being utilized. On Thursday, students will apply what they've done earlier in the week to an IB format. They will individually complete a paper 1 part A rough draft and submit it on Google Classroom. This assignment will require students to apply the economic theories they recently learned, apply them to real-world examples, and represent them visually with diagrams. Students will have an exemplar available to help them complete it. On Friday, students will form virtual groups in class again. They'll have another exemplar and they'll peer edit each other's work. Throughout the week, students will be supported by their peers and me. Students can pose questions to Padlet, which provides a forum for discussion, and I will be available for Zoom extra help. Thank you.
I just have to say, the three of you just knocked me out. This is such exemplary teaching, and it's such an engaging structure that you've come up with to keep kids not only engaged when they're on their own, but actually digging deeper. Because you know what we've learned from our experience with this is that we can actually enhance independent learning in some ways if the design is right, and clearly it is. A couple of questions that our teachers may be able to answer. I know that we've tried to answer it, but it's a concept that's new to folks. So somebody want to talk about, the question is, are we slowing the pacing down? Are we losing part of the curriculum? I know the answers to that are no, but how could we respond to that so that parents might understand what we did do?
Essentially, we looked at our lesson plans and we deconstructed them. We were doing all the same things that we would have done in the traditional 45-minute classroom. We're just doing them on different days. So those learning objectives, which are best suited to face-to-face instruction, have been taken out of each day and moved into 2 or 3 days of the week. And those activities, which allow kids to practice and perfect knowledge, have been taken out of all 5 days and moved into the other 2 days of the week. Truly, we're covering most of the material that we were able to cover before.
It's quite an accomplishment. I think that's well said. I think your other slide explains it quite well. And the question is, are we going to post this slide deck? And the answer to that is we will be posting the slide deck. Would somebody respond to the parent question about how will you, as a parent, know that your child is actually getting their work done? Good question. And I know there are lots of answers. What are some of the ways that we will be doing outreach to parents if a student, for example, is not engaging effectively with asynchronous work or in-person work for that matter?
Thank you, Dr. Wool. I would just say that constant communication with parents is essential in any format, right? So even if it was just a regular school year, we would need to be reaching out to parents whenever somebody's falling behind. And I think that's even more the case now.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, Mark. Is there anything anybody wants to add to Mark's comments? Our teachers are on top of things, and I think they do an excellent job of communicating, and if anything, this has enhanced their ability to do it in real time. So I'm excited about that. Next slide,
I just wanted
please.
to add.
Oh, please, Leah.
So sorry, to follow up with what Kristen said, that there's a lot of self-assessment opportunities in both models, and in doing so, the students are also able to have that agency, which we talked about before, to talk about where they're struggling. So we bridge what they see versus what we see, and that's how we can help more independent learning to occur.
Yeah, and we talk about agency a lot, and we know in our studies that agency is one of the most important qualities to build in young people so that they can advocate for themselves, and it's directly linked. I'm looking at Jen Egan, who's now the assistant principal at the middle school, but it was the IB MYP coordinator, and agency is such an important part of building an IB learner profile. How do you learn on your own? So these are really thoughtfully constructed. Thank you. Next slides, please. Mr. Galano, you want to talk about physical education? And I'm so proud of all the innovative work that's gone on in our physical education program. There were a bunch of questions about what does physical education look like in this kind of environment, and I think your staff has done some magnificent work.
Yes, so thank you, Dr. Wool. Just to go over what it will look like, it is following the same type of schedule. Obviously, it's an every other day class. So one day there will be an opportunity for synchronous learning, and the other day it'll be the asynchronous learning. A difference in spacing is the 12-foot social distancing protocol. That is something we have to follow. We'll also be using masks and limited use of equipment as the year goes on and we see how the virus evolves. That could change, but in the beginning, we are going to limit equipment. There'll be markers in the gym that are 6 and 12 feet apart. And anytime there's any aerobic or if there's heavy breathing going on, they're going to be 12 feet away. The two boxes that you see, the synchronous learning, we are emphasizing activity time. Obviously, all the research is stating that kids are struggling with depression, with anxiety, and we want to get the kids moving. So just like all the other subjects and the work that has been done, we essentialized our curriculum to match that and to really emphasize that during the time that they're in class in front of our teachers, there's going to be in high activity time. So some of the units that the students will see or experience are fitness walking, mindfulness, body weight training, aerobics, yoga, and orienteering. Just like their other subjects, the asynchronous days are going to be directly linked to the synchronous learning. In PE, this could look like a mini assignment, journals or reflections, video clips, recorded mini lessons from the teacher that either preview or supports the information. Shared articles, fitness logs, so something that the students it'll be more student driven, but will be directly linked. And Dr. Wool mentioned this, that we saw that in the spring, we kind of missed that. So in the fall and throughout the year, we're going to really emphasize that connection to ensure that learning is occurring. On the bottom of the synchronous learning, you'll see that we thought that obviously the social and emotional learning aspect of education is so important. Our PE teachers and our health teacher, especially at the high school level, they take a lot of pride in getting to know your children. They are constantly communicating with me, letting me know, they're in contact with your kids, they're checking up on your kids. So what they agreed to is also providing besides their 5-day schedule, 5-day periods, to an additional scheduled opportunity daily for live remote interaction with a PE teacher. So this could look like on a Monday, one of our PE teachers will post a time where any student, not just theirs, can sign in and interact with the PE teacher. This may look like a activity class. This may be a discussion. And our PE teachers and health teacher really take pride in getting to know your kids. And obviously myself, what I miss most is seeing your kids, and my staff feels the same way. So we felt this was another opportunity to get our certified staff in front of your kids, or an opportunity for your kids to interact with our staff. So, we're looking forward to it, and it's going to be a challenge due to the 12-foot social distancing, but we have worked with the staff over the summer to really get our different units to really essentialize to what we want the kids to know and do, and how can we do that in 12-foot social distancing.
I just think that's such a wonderful piece of work that your entire department did. In other places, sometimes physical education does not have the same emphasis or value, but if you study this slide, and you'll hear more about this tomorrow, our physical education staff are among the best educators in our district, and they work hard as they possibly can. I'm looking at my special ed director. It's rare that you see middle school physical educators partnering with school psychologists to work on social and emotional learning and dialectical behavioral therapy. So a lot to be proud of there. Thank you, Chris. Next slide, please. So I think this is going to fall largely to me tonight, but I certainly welcome the principal if she'd like to join me on this journey. So the fine and performing arts hybrid model brings pain to my heart, because so much of what kids love is going to be limited in particular ways. Band will not occur in school because we haven't yet found a way that we think is research-based to make it safe for that to occur. Orchestra, percussion, and chorus will take place in limited ways. A chorus will be 12-foot socially distanced, and kids will be wearing masks, but band will not occur in school. Orchestra and percussion, strings and drums essentially, will be playing 6 feet apart and masked. Lessons will occur virtually and synchronously, so in real time on days that kids are learning from home, but it may also occur on occasions when kids are in school, but we're not going to be pulling them out of class because they have limited time in their core academics.
Add to the band piece is that, so band will still meet as a group. They'll be working on things outside of playing instruments. They'll still be growing in learning composition, learning basic foundational pieces that then they would carry over into their asynchronous days, where they actually had, to use the language again, the synchronous opportunity for a lesson. So they would be applying those skills that they used more in like a pen and paper book, or using some type of technology while they're in the classroom.
Right. And as we learned last year, talk about another department that shined. They literally found ways to bring these kids together virtually and make incredible music. I'm thinking of our high school graduation. I was moved literally to tears by the choral production that Megan Test put together. Somehow she brought all these kids that couldn't be in one place together, and they produced just an extraordinary sound. So there will be a lot going on there, and dance will continue, although it will be different. And also, I should say, if you saw any of the videos we posted on our web page last year, somehow Miss Toteta managed magically to create a dance production when the kids didn't ever actually come together. They will also be socially distanced at 12 feet. I would just say to you, if you are a student who loves band, don't give up on band because it's not going to be playing in person. And I do think that's going to change. We see on the horizon some ways in which you can cover the instruments and make sure that it is safe, and we're working toward getting those answers for you. So to our incredible fine performing arts department, we know you're doing everything you can, and we're going to support you. Kids, hang in there, because I want to see another concert and I want to see some plays. Next slide, please.
So before we leave this
Yep.
section, there was a question about science, and while we didn't present
On the labs?
right.
Yep.
Dr. O'Keefe, if you know her, is always on top of things, always planning ahead, as is the science department, and they've been working on reimagining labs, mostly in virtual settings. So those of you who are concerned about the virtual, it will be likely virtual labs throughout, because we wouldn't put the health and safety of students at risk. So there is a plan for that.
And while you're jumping on questions, so there's a lot to say about dance. I don't want to go too deeply into it. I would suggest you email the dance instructor, but the kids are basically confined to 12 by 12 foot boxes, and they can't really move very much. So a lot of the work that Ms. Toteta will be doing will be virtual, although there will be opportunities where the kids can be masked and dance together.
They'll be learning their steps within their little boxes, their steps. They just won't be able to put it together into a piece. They would have to do that virtually.
Leah, I know that you know a great deal about this. Is there anything more I'm leaving out, do you think, that Deb would want me to say?
I don't think so.
Okay, thank you. So this is, I'm going to invite Dr. Tyler into this discussion and all of our teachers, because I want to be frank with families. I want people to understand the challenges of doing a virtual option in a remote environment. We've talked all night about the complexity of training teachers and writing curriculum. And we, by the way, we certainly understand your fears. That's why we decided to put it in place, because we thought the medical guidance was so inconsistent and confounding that as parents, we didn't want you to feel as if you couldn't make a choice that was in the best interest of your own child. Having said that, if you look at this chart, so in-person smaller group instruction on alternating days, remote video instruction on alternating days. So those students will essentially be zoomed into the classroom. They will not they won't see their classmates. They will see their teacher, and they will see the instructional board as if the teacher is experiencing a small Zoom on their laptop or on the smartboard, and the rest of the kids will be experiencing the class firsthand. The hybrid model, kids will be socially distanced, lots of teacher-student interaction because that's natural to a classroom, much more complicated when you're managing live and student interactions on a Zoom. Very challenging. By the way, just so you know, I field tested this personally all summer with my cabinet, and I consider myself pretty adept at teaching, and it's a lot to manage. Virtual and asynchronous instruction on alternate days, essentially the same for kids that are in the virtual option. But Dr. Tyler, is there more you would like to add to this challenge for our teachers? I know that you have defined feelings about it well, it's fine, and I agree with you, by the way.
Yeah, so you know, this is something completely new, and you know, quite frankly, it's going to be very, very difficult to kind of keep an eye on the online world as well as an eye on the classroom. And so, you know, we have some concerns about how this is going to fare and how the students are going to be best served when this option is in place. So there's some, you know, mitigating circumstances to operating in this model, and you know, we have to have ongoing discussions about how we kind of handle those circumstances, assessments, and differentiation and things like that.
Yeah, and I think
so it's an ongoing open discussion.
It is an ongoing open discussion, even on the technological side, because we, you know, in a few days, we'll be putting together a team of our most expert teachers who have experience in this virtual model and see how it translates into hybrid. In a minute, you'll hear from Brian Seligman, our Director of Technology. We've tried to minimize the management part of it for teachers, but it's still going to be a challenge. But before we switch slides, I just want to give our teachers or directors a chance to weigh in if you want to add anything to this discussion about the challenge of simultaneous teaching in the two worlds. I'll take your silence as your.
Lou, if I could just jump in with one comment. I know we had gotten this when we were first talking about putting in a virtual option when we're in hybrid learning. And a number of people have asked the question. You will need to make a commitment. At this point, the expectation is that if you choose the virtual option while we're in a hybrid learning model, you will have to commit for at least one marking period. So that's the first 10 weeks. At the elementary level, it'll be for they're done on basically
trimesters, yeah.
A trimester. So you would have to commit for a trimester. It's not going to be, it's unwieldy as it is. So to have students going in and out on a weekly or every couple of week basis. So
we actually have a slide coming up.
Exactly, and people will be, as I understand it, they will be getting by the end of the week. We will be letting parents or putting out the survey to parents. They can make their option if that's what they're choosing to do.
And there are many questions that have popped up, and we have a slide coming up that will define the parameters under which you can make these choices and how you could potentially go back and forth. Not something we recommend. But I want to just go back to something that Dr. Tyler said, that we are still figuring it out, as is everybody else. And I know other districts are doing it. Where I think we have maybe done a little bit better job is we've been testing lots of things. And now we're trying to fit this in, because let's remember that at some point, it's likely that the entire district will go virtual. The difference there is that teachers are dealing in one environment, not two. And so that is a difference. And that is also why we've made a commitment to keeping the class sizes small when we go virtual. And just another question or concern that was raised. So we carefully build each class. It's literally hand scheduled and balanced. So we've built those classes and designed them in half. You'll be hearing about what team you're on soon. Once the survey is completed, we'll readjust, but we're not going to change the team, because if the class size is 12 and the teacher has 8 in the room and 4 on the outside, and the 4 come back, we'd like to see them stay together when possible. So we're not going to overburden one teacher because there's more physical space in the room. It's a great challenge to manage those two environments, and we have a lot of work to do between now and September to get it meaningfully done. Our concern, and our teachers are always about this, they don't want to just do it. They want to make it valuable for the kids in the virtual mode and still make it manageable and sustainable. So next slide, please, Michael. So Brian Seligman is our Director of Technology, and he and a bunch of others have been field testing some things. This is our simple attempt to make the experience palatable for teachers in terms of management, but also meaningful in terms of instruction for kids. Brian?
Sure. Thanks, Dr. Wool. As you described the difference between in-person and the virtual instruction, I just wanted to show the visual. Basically, our teachers are set up with technology to use during instruction for in-person instruction the way they would normally for any school year. The difference here is that we've added a web camera to the classroom, which will be focused on the teacher and on the classroom instruction on the smartboard or a whiteboard, where students who have chosen the virtual only model can view and hear the teacher and see the instruction directly through the smartboard, through a Zoom or a Google Meet. So this is our attempt at basically live streaming what the teacher is instructing for the students that are home and not able to come to school.
Yeah, and I saw the test that you did, Brian, and the thing that I was impressed with was the sound. So teachers are able from their teaching station to interact with the kids on Zoom, and they can hear the instruction as well. So this is one of the simpler but more effective models that we have, but we are going to be turning this over to our expert teachers to say, try it out. How does it work? What suggestions do you have? I'm sure if I gave it to Mark or Kristen tonight, they might have better ideas or ways to extract more from this if possible. So thank you, Brian. Now I just want to talk about some constraints, and I'm going to ask again that we, Michael, next slide, some prerequisites. So this is what Mrs. Mangan was talking about. So if you make the decision, you have to stay in for a full marking period at the high school level. Placement changes will only be permitted at the beginning of a marking period because we don't want kids moving back and forth. Students who participate virtually, and this is important, must have their cameras on and be visible to the teacher, because if the teacher is going to effectively engage with the child, they need the ability to see and to know exactly what is going on. I had a very comical conversation with a college student the other night who told me he shuts his camera off like this, and he goes and he does his chores while he's listening passively to his teacher. Well, that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for you to be actively engaged, and we want to be able to see you. And I will also say that, you know, teachers seamlessly in our environment put kids into groups. Sometimes it's think, pair, share. It will be less fluid for the kids learning virtually, although I'm sure our teachers will do a better job than most. And on the days, this is a question that keeps coming up, so let me clarify it again. If you pick the virtual model, your schedule is the same as kids that are coming to school. On the days that they're in class, you're in a Zoom with them. On the days that they're learning from home, you're learning from home. So there's no other difference. But I would ask if anybody wants to add to those ideas that I just shared. Okay, next slide, please. So this is really important. I get this question a lot. I get it very much at the elementary level. Why don't you bring more kids in? We'd love to have all the kindergartners in. Why don't you bring all the ninth graders in? We're with you. We'd like to bring everybody in, but we are limited by the ideas of social distancing. So after very thoughtful consideration, our director and the two supervisors of special ed identified those student populations with disabilities as needing to be in school every day. And some of our English language learners are in 4 days a week, and entering and emerging, I think, are in 5. Is that correct? There's no number on the last bullet. I think that's 5, though.
They're in 5.
They're in 5. So those are the kids that are here 4 or 5 days. Next slide, Michael. So Mrs. Moran is not here tonight. She's taking a much needed vacation after a very successful principalship of the summer school program. Who's going to do this one? Okay, Kim, you win.
I can. Sure. So basically what you just said, Dr. Wool, our entering and emergent students will be attending all 5 days in school. In some cases, they will be working and being in the classroom every single day. And in other times, they will be paired working with somebody on their asynchronous assignments. So their E&L teachers will oversee what the most appropriate schedule is for them.
Yes, and I appreciate the level of detail that goes into this, because each one of those students has an individually crafted schedule that serves their needs best. So.
No, that was exactly what I was just going to add. The entering and emerging on the levels of language proficiency, the transition and expanding are the higher levels. And so we've focused resources on students who have the highest need, which you'll hear again as we talk about students with disabilities. It's the same focus where we know that live instruction or in-person instruction is most necessary, most important to students who are at their early level of proficiency or have the highest set of needs. And we've tried to prioritize resources that way.
Yeah, I just want to say, thank you, Michael. I'm reading a comment. I apologize if someone feels we have a bias towards in-person learning. We don't. What we're trying to say to you is that we're going to do the very best we can for your children, but we just haven't seen that there's any experience that replaces in-person learning, but we're going to do it as well as we possibly can. I promise you that. So we're going to make that work in any way that we possibly can. Also, I see some of our teachers commenting that sometimes it is like being in 2 worlds or 3 worlds. And we agree with that as well. We will very thoughtfully and thoroughly monitor at-risk students. We have multiple things in place to make sure that that happens. And I think that's one of the areas we did shine last year, because our psychologists and our special ed teachers and so many of our teachers know their kids so well. As soon as there was a blip, we were paying attention. So we will do a good job there as well. Next slide, please. So Julie, this is really where I think you want to take us through how you have thoughtfully constructed each of these experiences unique to these populations.
Yeah, sure. Good evening, everyone. So as Dr. Wool and Mr. Greenfield indicated before, we are charged with, and I think it's the right decision, that we should pay attention to all students, but certainly our most vulnerable learners. We're excited that we were able to have a successful in-person extended school year program for our students with the most significant needs. And so we were really pleased about that. It was a good summer for them. So similarly, we are able to have students in self-contained settings, special class settings at the high school in our phase classroom, or if they are in 3 or more self-contained classes, come into school every single day. Students in our general ed classes like integrated co-teaching or learning center, consultant teacher services, or who just get related services will attend school every other day according to their Husky and Pride schedule. I did see some questions from parents for students in integrated co-teaching classes or general ed classes. There will be touch points and contact minimally from the student's case manager on the days that the students are home. In terms of related services like speech and language therapy, counseling, or even learning center, those will be provided every day synchronously. So meaning it will be, if your child is not in school every day, they will get those services either live in person or live via Zoom or Google Meet on a rotating schedule. CSE meetings will be, at this time, will continue via Google Meet or Zoom, and all CSE evaluations will continue according to the special ed laws and regulations.
And I just want to say again that while those are a bunch of bullets, those are people's children, and the level of concern and care that went into crafting each individual schedule is, to me, a credit to the kind of attention we pay to all kids, but especially our most vulnerable. A couple of quick questions. If a student is ill, non-COVID related, can they Zoom into the class? That is going to be an individual decision that we make on a case-by-case basis. If a student is so sick that they shouldn't be in school, they probably should be resting. But if a teacher feels that it's appropriate and then chooses to invite them in, I think that we'll leave that to the discretion of the principal and the teacher. Can you request, if you have 2 students, one in the middle school, one in the high school, that are siblings and they're both going to be virtual, to be on the same day? The answer is you certainly can. We want to be as accommodating to families as we possibly can. It's not possible to team kids based on friendships. We would love to be able to do that, but there are so many other variables that go into putting together a schedule. As Ms. Bukema mentioned, every student at the high school has almost a completely unique set of criteria. So because our school provides for such individualized pathways, that's not really possible. And there's a question, Julie, in the queue about IEP that you can see, and we will provide all of the requirements of an IEP, whether virtually or not. So if a child needed something read out loud, all of that has already been figured out. But I would suggest that the individual asking that question just email directly to Miss Snyder, and we'll get you that answer.
Right, yes, all accommodations for students with Section 504 accommodation plans and IEPs will be implemented. Some of them, like preferential seating if you're Zoom, I mean, some of them are not applicable, but anytime we're assessing students, we will absolutely implement the testing accommodations.
Yes, and I hope we've answered the question about ENL students. They will be supported both online and in person. This is a good question. If there are no lockers, what do they do with their jackets? Well, I'm almost smiling because Mr. Mastrota and Mrs. Griffo will tell you they hardly use their lockers even when they're assigned. So I don't think it's going to be that complicated. It might be. We are working on the concept of how to administer assessments for kids that are virtual. We have a lot of ideas. As you know, we have some experience with this with last year, so we will try to get you a better idea. Somebody just answered the question in the queue. Kids don't use lockers anyway. So if a child is feeling sick, I think we've answered that. But if your child is feeling sick, I can't say this enough, in this environment, keep them home, please, because the level of anxiety they're going to raise for themselves and others might not be worth the day of school that they're going to engage in. Next slide, please. So I'm very excited about this slide because there's so much important news in here. As I mentioned, Julie Snyder, really, I tip my hat to all the hard work she's done with the guidance counselors with the school psychologists to prepare them for what they're about to face with kids. But there's a whole nother level of college and career readiness and school counseling that our Mrs. Malchevsky is going to take us through right now.
Great, thanks, Dr. Wool. So certainly I see the school counselors as sort of our first line of defense outside of their classroom teachers when it comes to social, emotional health and wellness. So we are really lucky to have 7 school counselors at the high school with really reasonable caseload sizes. So certainly this is work that our school counselors are expert in and will be available to students both synchronously and asynchronously. Which I think is a really nice option as well, because families and students have the option to build it into their schedule throughout the week as appropriate. If it makes more sense for your child to meet face-to-face with a school counselor, that's an option. If it's easier for your family to coordinate on an asynchronous day, that's a really great option as well. So we're lucky that the school counselors have that sort of flexibility in their day-to-day schedules. Of course, school counselors will also be working with students around academics, academic advisement. The high school has a robust progress monitoring system that was developed back in the spring, and will continue with some new elements moving into the fall, where school counselors really work as point people again in having proactive approaches to students when we start to see them slip. And then of course, college and career readiness. And I had to put it in maroon or just change the color because that really tends to be the hot topic that you see in the news and the papers, and certainly many of you are experiencing as well. Students who haven't been able to access an SAT or an ACT, particularly students with accommodations who have had trouble finding testing locations over the past several months. And while colleges have been really responsive overall around changing and updating their testing policies, we still want to provide our students every opportunity possible when it comes to college admissions. So in that regard, we're going to continue to monitor everything that we're learning from colleges and universities, SAT and ACT, and build really specific individualized plans for each of our students. What I do want to specifically mention, and what Lou was probably referring to being excited about, was our SAT and ACT. We just this week were able to secure SAT and ACT in-district testing for this fall for our 12th grade students. So that means any 12th grader who wants to sit for the SAT or ACT can register in-house through us to have this testing opportunity. Parents will no longer have to search for a testing location or a test center or worry about how accommodations will be fulfilled when it comes to the SAT and ACT. We will do that all in-house in October. So all of that information will be coming out for our 12th graders in this regard. And it's not all about testing, but I do want to mention we plan to continue with this. This is about college admissions and getting ready for the process of college admissions. So we still plan on hosting our PSAT and our pre-ACTs. And that's in addition to all of the other small group and larger group parent and student meetings we have around college admissions process as well throughout the fall and into the spring. We'll just have to decide whether it makes most sense to do those virtually or in person.
Thank you, Kelly. And there's a question in the queue about 11th graders being able to take the ACT. We may not have that answer yet.
Sure, but we're looking into it. So really, it's a nice option to have this in the fall and October. If it goes well, if it works for our students, you know, monitoring the current situation in schools and test centers, it's certainly an option for the spring. So we'll absolutely keep our eye on that as an option for 11th grade students.
Thank you very much. That's great. Okay, great job. Thanks. Next slide. And now we're really going to get a chance to hear a little bit more in depth. You know, there's a lot of talk about social emotional well-being and mental health. I think we've done a good job of attending to getting our professionals ready to help in this domain. You want to speak to this, Jules?
Yeah, and I just want to piggyback off of what Kelly said, because the school psychologists, and we will have 4, which is the addition of 1 at the high school next year, in addition to our student assistance counselors, and then the 7 school counselors. And it's a very tight team, and they work very seamlessly together. And as Kelly said, the first line of defense is typically the school counselor, and there is a seamless referral process out if a student needs a little bit more care and attention. You know, I'm very proud that our school psychologists are top of the line. They really have immersed themselves in trauma-sensitive and trauma-informed teaching practices. They taught several courses this summer that were very well received. They had good outreach to our teachers, K-12, our administrators. They are also working with our new teacher orientations, and they plan to work with their building principals and assistant principals to make sure that we devote time and attention to this, not only for our students, which is obviously very essential, but for our adult community as well. So they're experts in this area, and they're highly trained, and they're really immersed in this work and able to help. We also have a district-wide behavioral specialist. So we really put resources and time and attention into making sure that our community feels healthy, both physically, but emotionally and academically. So this is important to us, and we're doing good work around this.
We certainly are, and I'm so excited that part of the reorientation for teachers will be our psychologists spending time on those first 2 days, just helping teachers develop a sense of language and also identifying resources for teachers, because we don't want anybody to feel like they're on their own, kids or teachers, in this new world we're all about to experience. Thank you, Julie. Kim, could you answer this question? It's now come up twice. I know you know the answer because you talked to me about it. The BOCES question. What about?
So BOCES has decided to do an everyday offering for their students. So students who are in, let's say they're in the Pride group, obviously that will be their regular 9-period schedule. If it's on one of their days that's an asynchronous day, we will also see that they get to BOCES, and then they would do their asynchronous work outside of the time that they're at BOCES.
Thank you.
And Luke, could I just add one more thing?
Please, Julie. Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Part of the trauma-informed approach to this work is there's sort of 3 core principles: creating a safe environment, building relationships and connectedness. And again, this is applicable to students and adults, but also supporting and teaching skills, emotion regulation. And so, Chris Galano, our athletic director, mentioned the collaboration between our PE teachers and our psychologists and our health teachers in teaching, equipping our students with those skills to manage their own emotions. And emotions can run very high in this kind of environment. So there's
rest assured, our dialectical behavioral therapy team is really skilled at this work, and many of our students already have benefited from learning these skills.
Yeah, it's really become almost an internal language for many kids, and that's really a credit to how well it's been done. Julie, could you just answer this one other question about 504s?
Yeah, let
It's,
me.
how will school learning be organized for students with a 504 plan?
Right. So 504 plans, all the accommodations, you know, if they're appropriate, right? So like if they're in school, the accommodations will obviously be implemented in school. If they're virtually, we're going to have to discuss, again, like I gave the example of preferential seating in a virtual world, that I think that's not applicable. I can be convinced otherwise. If you have any particular question, I mean, we want to ensure equal access. There's no doubt about that. If you have any particular questions about how to implement a certain accommodation, please don't hesitate to call me. I welcome the phone calls. I've been talking to a lot of parents. This is tricky stuff. So, but certainly we must ensure equal access.
And you know, I just say to everybody out there, we know that our plans are imperfect. It's impossible to make them perfect, but your outreach directly to your principals or to the many fine educators you see on this Zoom is the best way to get the most direct answer. I see a couple of more questions about the ACT and when it can be offered. I'm just going to suggest, rather than we go into that, share your questions with Mrs. Malchevsky, and she'll put it into her considerations as we go forward. There was one other thing I thought was interesting. Yes, Kim, you and I talked about this today. Didn't have a chance to discuss it with Mrs. Malchevsky, but we are leaning towards not having college visits be in person. Obviously, we're trying to limit visits from parents. We don't always know where those college counselors have been, even if they're not from a state. They're obviously visiting others. So at the moment, we're leaning towards virtual as opposed to in person. If that changes, we will let you know. Okay, shall we carry on?
Sure, just to clarify a couple questions I'm getting on siblings. Just so you know, the pairings have already been done with the middle school. Siblings are automatically attending on the same day, whether they are paired at the high school, both attend there, or they also have another sibling at the middle school. Unfortunately, for the questions I'm getting from elementary parents, some of them in my email, they're following a set day schedule of the week. And we're following a 6-day cycle. So it will be alternating what days the high school students are in from week to week. One week it'll be on site Monday, Wednesday, Friday, the following week on Tuesday, Thursday. And given the fact that the elementary is on set days, we would be unable, unfortunately, to accommodate that. I know some parents have asked for their high school and middle school children to be on opposite days for that very reason, so they could be home to assist with an elementary age child. So we would need to hear the specific request only if you don't want your children on the same day.
That's a very good point. And that'll be helpful to Brian and I as we finalize the new survey. We would only want you to tell us if you don't want your kids on the same day. Otherwise, we're going to work to do that. Thanks for clarifying that, Kim.
Yeah.
And Julie, thanks for this slide. And again, it just underscores what a great job we're doing. Next slide, Michael.
Lou, there were a couple of questions about exams. And
sure,
one was about the Regents exams. As far as we know right now, New York State is not canceling the Regents. So we are planning against those standards and for the Regents to be administered in 2021 until we hear otherwise from the state. There are questions about grading, and grading particularly in the virtual option. We're assessing the situation. This is a question of equity. It's a question of leveling the playing field. It's a question of fairness, and it's moreover a question of the instructional models and the reservations we have, not the preference we have, but the reservations we have for how to design a fair, consistent, coherent, and equitable grading system when there are two instructional models happening simultaneously. So we're trying to tackle it. We have good ideas. We have as much experience as anybody around to figure this out, and we're looking at the researchers and looking for guidance from experts in the field, and we will share information about how we're going to about that as this develops.
Yes, and Michael, I think what I want to say, because I don't want people, and I know Dr. Tyler and all of our teachers feel the same way. While we may have concerns about the challenge of hybrid and virtual coming together, that doesn't mean we're not going to meet those challenges. It means we're going to do everything we can possibly do together. And in this district, we emphasize together. I don't plan around the teachers union. I don't plan around the needs of teachers. I plan for the needs of teachers. And we acknowledge to folks watching at home that we understand how important this was to you. That's why we did it. But we're going to have things to figure out. And I can promise you this, if you're watching tonight, you know we do our homework. We are doing our homework now. We will get the right answers. It may take us more time than we have tonight, but we are still at it. This is a work in progress. Not to be mundane, but Kim, and it's not mundane, but in this environment when we're talking about such high level things, can you just briefly describe or do you want to hand it to Larry and Lori to talk about drop off pickup?
Sure, Larry or Lori, either you want to?
Yeah, sure. I can take that. So, students are going to come onto campus in 3 ways. They're going to come on a bus, they're going to come be dropped off by a parent, or they're going to obviously drive onto campus on their own vehicle. When the buses arrive, they're going to be on the same side. They always have the student union side, and we will have security out there, and we will disembark one bus at a time. And we'll put a process in to check the badges on the student cell phones so that they can enter. And once one bus is cleared, we'll bring the next buses up, and that will be a change for students and the bus drivers. Generally 2, 3, 4 buses may let the kids out at one time to get them in, but we're obviously going to kind of control that and limit that a little bit more. And then on the other side, the athletic side, the student side, where there's parent drop off, once again, we'll have a security guard out there, other personnel if necessary, and same idea. We're going to kind of control the flow of students into the building. We obviously have to check their phones once again, both those being dropped off by a parent and obviously students who drive onto campus. So we're going to work on some specific procedures, but it's going to be something where we're going to control the flow. And, like anything else, the first couple of weeks, we're going to see what works and what doesn't work and make changes and be flexible where we need to.
Right. And if you're driving your child, we will tell you, we will direct you. Lori, will there be driver's ed? I don't know. I think not, right?
So far, the state has not provided any further guidance since April. They've been silent. I've been contacting them every week, and they're still silent on that. I saw a question about the permit test.
Yes.
I'm not sure about that, but I do have it on a list to follow up on.
And where do the walkers enter, Larry?
When they come on to school, we'll probably bring them in through the student union. We'll have all staff come through the main entrance. We have a new vestibule, new setup there, which is going to give us an opportunity to bring the staff in. And also we'll be changing kind of our sign-in procedures for staff so that we can once again adhere to social distancing.
Yes. And before we close out tonight, folks, I'm going to show you a way to look at all this information that we put together. That's a lot simpler than what we're going through here tonight, but certainly the level of detail and hearing it from these experts is always helpful. We are going to talk about sports in a minute. We are going to talk about...
Dr. Before you
yes.
move on, there's one question I think we passed over about someone questioning if parents will be notified if students are late or absent.
Yes, and that procedure has not changed. It will follow the same procedure that has always been in place. If a student is late or absent, you will be notified, or if a student doesn't attend class for a period, you will be notified. There's no change to that as I know. I'm looking at Kim, Lori, and Larry. Is there?
There is no change to that. Obviously, we'll be adapting practices for students who are logging in for their synchronous from at home, but attendance will be taken for those students if that is the option they've chosen.
But I just want to answer one question that I think is a really good question. And I know, there are folks on all sides of these issues, right? So one good question is, once a webcam is allowed in my classroom, how is my child's privacy protected? Very fair question. We're mounting the webcam so that it only shows the teacher teaching and has access to, via electronic mechanism, either a picture of a whiteboard or a share out, just like you're being shared a screen tonight, of the smartboard or the Zoom session. So that was one of the limitations I shared with folks, that the kids at home will not see their classmates. They'll hear them, but they won't see them. I hope that's responsive to that question. So extracurricular, I just want to say why I think this is so much more important than people think. Try to remember being a teenager. I know you all love math and physics, but some kids actually like other things. And that's sometimes the thing that gets them up in the morning. So we really think a large part of the social and emotional learning experience is extracurricular clubs and sports activities. Now, as Chris will tell you, there currently, am I right, Chris? There's still no plan for a fall season.
Yeah, as of right now, and you can see it on the slide, the second bullet, the New York State Public High Schools Athletic Association has moved the start date, which was supposed to be August 24th to September 21st. That is a loose date. We are bounded by the governor, and he will mandate or set the guidelines to when athletics may start. There is a possibility that there would be a condensed seasons in the spring, which would be a winter season first, and then a fall and a spring season, all condensed. I could tell you, I saw one of the questions about if we are remote or if someone is doing the hybrid model and they are home, can they attend? I'm speaking specific to athletics. The state has waived it and is permitting students to join the athletic team if they are at home, either remote learning or doing their asynchronous learning. We are still waiting, like I said, up for the guidelines. At this time, we're not permitted to have any off-season workouts or anything through the school. And I'm in constant contact with the task force that's set forth by the Section 1, and all the information that you see here, plus a lot more, has been added to our website. So I advise you to go to our website, the athletics tab, and there's a COVID informational tab, and we will be updating that as soon as I get information. I've had a lot of students, coaches, and people reach out, and unfortunately, I don't have concrete answers yet, and it's a waiting game to see when this will occur. If the governor does permit it, there will be phases based off the NFHS guidelines, and obviously those phases involve small groups at first, and a lot of different protocols that will keep our kids safe. So it's not just going back into full practicing, but either way, I'll be in contact, putting it on the website and sending messages out to let us know about athletics.
And Chris, right now, the coaches are still maintaining contact with their teams, because we think, by the way, right, it's not just about the athletics, it's about the camaraderie, the culture that is built by a great coach between and among students. And our coaches they take that just as seriously. And so we are maintaining that. But I want to also shift while we're on this slide. Lori, I know you supervise all the clubs. And I think we had, considering where we were last year, a remarkable experience with our extracurriculars. Can you just talk about how this might work in the virtual hybrid model, why we're maintaining clubs? What do we hope to do?
Sure. So, typically clubs, when they meet, are on a set day. We envision that would continue. So if it were Wednesdays after school, for example, there would be opportunities when students are in school to then stay for their club, and then perhaps have students who are on their asynchronous day Zoom in, and then the following week it would be the opposite group of kids would be in school if that were maintained on Wednesday, and then the other group could Zoom in. I know in the spring there were plenty of clubs that continued, and I got to hop on a couple of their Zoom calls, and sometimes they were baking and doing all kinds of things. The advisors really were creative, and it really helped kids to connect in ways that they weren't able to do, or in the classes and things like that.
It's so true. I mean, there were so many profound experiences that our advisors provided to kids last year. I mean, Model Congress just blew me away, the things that they accomplished. Debate maintained a high profile, and so many others. The theater programs, I didn't address that question to the person who asked it. The theater programs will occur as they always occur if we are permitted to do it, because we can find ways to social distance kids on the stage. And if that's possible, we will do it. We're so blessed to have a board that understands that maintenance of activities like these are the lifeblood of a high school. These are the ways that kids mix them with other kids they don't typically engage with outside of their friend group. And they really help to define the very positive, extraordinary culture that is Harrison High School. So I'm certainly grateful for all of that. Next slide, Michael.
Lou, I just wanted to echo that message from being at the section meetings. Obviously, every school in the Westchester area, almost all of them have reached out to see how we did it as far as involving coaches throughout the process and keeping them involved. Just like the clubs, we had a lot of great success with it. And the surrounding school districts are looking to us, for as a model district. So I applaud the board and you for pushing that and allowing us to continue to work with the kids.
Thank you, Chris. The question on BOCES, as far as I know, BOCES is not offering a virtual option. So we can find out. This is a recurring question, and I'm not ready to answer it, but I'll give my administrative team a chance. We're not ready to release these schedules just yet. Very soon, though, because we want to get it right, and we're also going to send you another survey on Friday with all of these new informations. And then we talked about band a little bit earlier. It won't just be canceled because they're not playing in school. We're going to find ways to keep the clubs intact, including band.
And Dr. Wool, if I could just jump in, a question I saw earlier in regard to physicals and immunizations. So for sports physicals, the state is allowing any physical completed in 2018-19 or 2019-20 to count for fall sports in 2020. So that's helpful to parents who might otherwise struggle to get those accomplished. But all immunization requirements remain in force and effect. So parents are required to have children properly immunized for the first day of school. And school nurses have sent out information to families, so they have that information about what's required.
And Brian, to clarify, that includes children who choose the virtual. If families choose that, their child still has to be immunized even if they're not coming to school. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's a great clarification. That
Thank you, Kim.
State that even if students choose a virtual option, they have to meet the same immunization requirements as if they were attending school in person. That's correct.
Yeah, and I'm just going to give a shout out to everybody. Get your flu shots this year, including your children. That is going to help us stay open or not. There is a comment that showing only the board and the teacher doesn't protect the child's privacy completely. That's accurate. And when we go to a full virtual, your child's will be visible to their classmates in a full virtual model. It is absolutely imperfect. We will do our level best to protect children, but in this environment, they are going to be interacting and seeing each other just as you're seeing me tonight. On that note, though, I know Mr. Seligman will talk about some of the ways that we can help by giving a virtual background. I'm actually sitting in my study, and if you saw what was behind the rainbow, it's just a big pile of books and a mess. So we can sometimes help by giving some ways for kids to maintain some semblance of privacy. Brian, do you want to just speak about, Brian Seligman, about technology, please?
Sure. For the high school, it's the same as it has been in the past. We have a BYOD. So if anyone has a need for a device or theirs broke from at home, we can provide it to them. Feel free to contact Ms. Bukema for this, and we'll provide any device that anyone needs. In addition to a device, if anyone needs internet at home as well, we will provide that as well. So The only thing I would say is that parents have to be, or that really the kids have to be responsible in charging their devices. So when they come to school, they bring their own device and it's charged. It's going to be very difficult and challenging to have students share devices. If a student does come to school and needs one device and we have one available, we'll provide that. But we'll have a protocol in place on what to do when we return the device so that no one borrows it the next day. We'll sanitize that appropriately. Nothing's changed in terms of software. Most teachers will use Google Classroom, they'll use Zoom, they'll use Google Meets, and they'll be helping kids navigate this world if they're new to it and they need help at the beginning of the school year. Oh,
Yeah.
one more thing, sorry. There is a help desk support form. It's on the website, and feel free to fill that out. And any parents with questions about anything related to technology, we'll be answering those pretty quickly.
Thank you. Hey, Joan O'Keefe, can you just talk about DDP? There's a question about how that will happen.
All right, Lou, I'll have to make her available to speak.
If you can. If not, one of us can answer it. Okay, and we'll get back to that question when she comes on board. Brian, could you go to the next slide? Michael, the next slide, please. I'm going to go through this relatively quickly, and Margaret, if there's anything you want to add. So we're asking for your help to assist with social distancing. We will survey you again because things may have changed since you last asked. But know this, if you say yes, you're dropping your kids off, you can always change your mind. We would not hold that against you, but it's helpful for our planning as we try to reduce the number of kids on the bus from a high of 46 to 21. So one child per seat with one exception. If it's a sibling, we'll sit two in a seat. Here you can see that the students and the monitors will all be wearing a face mask, as will the bus driver. The only exception is if the bus driver wears glasses and he chooses to take it off because that is permissible. If a student does not have a mask, one will be provided. So anything you can do to help us, that will be part of the survey round 2. Next slide, Michael. The disinfection part. So we will not go through a complete disinfection between the AM, PM runs. The bus drivers will clean the high touch areas, but in the overnight, there will be a complete sanitization of every bus. Windows will be open as weather permits. The drivers will wear gloves, as will the monitors, and we will strictly enforce no eating on the bus because obviously you're taking off your mask. Margaret, is there anything you want to add to those two?
No, I think you covered everything.
Okay. Next slide, please, Michael. This is another confounding mandate. So as Kim mentioned, we will not be allowing deliveries to school. So kids will be eating our school lunch, which by the way are absolutely excellent. I'm sure our teachers would raise their hands in favor of our school lunches. They're almost custom made. However, if your child wants to have lunch provided on the days that they're learning from home, we will survey you on that and we would make a lunch available for you to purchase and take with you at the end of the day when you're going home for your learning from home day. If you want to manage your own food, you don't need to make that request. And by the way, for students on free lunch, that's available, period. You just don't even have to ask, just we'll provide that for you. Cafeteria is going to be interesting. It's always where people have their greatest concern. Before I let Kim describe what's going to happen, or whomever she decides wants to describe it, know this, that the 6-foot rule is written that it's a mask or 6 feet. We've decided that it is a mask and 6 feet, and that in a cafeteria setting for a brief period of time with kids cohorted, we're going to let them take off their masks and eat their food. We think that this is a good social and emotional component for their well-being, to have some opportunity to commune with their friends and classmates. Once their meal is completed, they will put their mask back on and be given some free time. Kim, what would you like to share about that I haven't?
Sure, we've met with food services through the provider that we have, and for the first 2 weeks, it's going to be cold options for food, still sandwiches and all of those things, and before it moves in to opening up full scale. They just kind of want to look at the volume and everything before they open it up to full scale hot meals. Still the sandwich bar, although the organization will be a little bit different. We'll have 2 sandwich bars now, which is great in terms of lines. But yes, students will be cohorted, as I said earlier. They'll be sitting at tables with the same students that they eat with every single day. And we are working with getting some feedback from students on the best way to manage that at the opening of school. So once students sit at those tables, it would be something that they would continue in, and we'll have to look at a later time whether or not it'd be appropriate for them to be able to, change their table environments.
Yep, and thank you for saying that, because I know that's going to be a tough question. It's hard for kids to stay with the same friend group, and I know Brian will be working with you and our district physician to try to figure that out. I hear that Joan has come back to the meeting. Joan, could you just answer the question? I think it's a student who's very interested in DDP, that how that's going to occur and if it's going to occur. Mrs. O'Keefe? Brian, I don't know if she is there.
I see her, but I can't hear her.
Joan, you have to unmute.
She's muted.
Well, I do know that DDP is occurring. We are looking at purchasing individual items for students to use, just like we are in sciences. For example, like goggles in the sciences would be the same thing for DDP. Each student would have a set they'd keep in the classroom. That's also including the tools that we use in there. Obviously, any kind of shared equipment would be unable to do those type of pieces, and we're looking at creating the space within there for the social distancing in those classes.
That's thorough enough, Kim. Thank you, Joan. I'm sorry you couldn't get on to answer. And
I
also,
hope I did okay, Joan.
and also the question about art was the same. We're going to be providing individual implements, so kids will not be sharing those. Last slide, Michael, and then we're going to jump to the new website. So we really are committed to communicating and finding feedback. I know that sometimes people say we don't do things the way other districts do. I would completely agree with that. We don't ask you questions until we know that those questions can be answered in a thorough and appropriate way. I think we spent a lot of time this summer seeing these brilliant teachers of ours grow in their own professional capacity so that they can better guide what we think we can provide you. We're still not sure. We have somewhat better ideas, so we will be continuing to modify this document as we learn more. And that's what you would want us to do. I will continue to update the PTAs and the PT Council. As we did last year, you'll be getting regular letters from me and or the principals, maybe not as regular as you did last year because that was a little too much for all of us. And we will be surveying you to get your feedback at the end of 2 weeks. That'll mostly be a building-based survey. Then 4 weeks will be a district survey. And the end of 10 weeks, which is a full marking period at the secondary level, we will share that. But before you disappear on me, now we're at 394. Michael, could you open up the new page? So folks, this is a little bit easier for you to navigate than what we just went through. So if you look at the left-hand side, the first button, Michael, could you just click on the health and safety protocols? So that takes you through all the things you want to know about, and those are all hot links at the top of the page that takes you right through them, right? But let's just say you wanted to know more about virtual learning. Go to the Harrison High School, if you wouldn't mind, Michael. Here are all the things we just talked about broken down, so you don't have to listen to this again, or unless you really like to torture yourself, you can go right here and check out the instructional models, special education, visitors, with all of the things we just talked about, including down below. You can see the descriptors of the individual models, virtual learning with the hybrid, 100% learning from home. So all of those things are here. This presentation will be archived here, as will the slide deck that I just shared with you. And the last thing I'd like to show you is the FAQ. which is pretty comprehensive. I mean, we'll be adding to it as it goes, but it is epic. So it attempts to tease things out under these 5 big umbrellas. But if you go in there and look them over, many of the questions that you posed tonight are answered more comprehensively here if you didn't feel you got your answer. So I certainly appreciate over 500 people attending tonight. I truly appreciate that at this time of evening, there are still 385 of you present. Madam President, I'd just like to give you an opportunity, or any members of the board that are attending, to ask questions.
If anyone has any questions, I know we have a couple of board members who are here in 2 capacities, also as parents of high school students. I will just say that this is, I actually probably shouldn't count, but I've seen presentations about this process, and I continue to be impressed by how much time and effort and energy has gone into them. I've also spent an amount of time I will not share looking at what other districts are doing, because it's important for us to know what is happening in communities around us. And I think that the care that's gone into making sure that what will happen for all of our children this year has been just extraordinary. But I do also think it's important for all of us to remember that this school year is not going to look like anything any of us have ever experienced before. And we all need to be, I think, cognizant of that. It's going to have an impact on our children, what their lives are like on a daily basis, how they feel about school. It's impacting their relationships. And I know we've spent a lot of time talking about their social and emotional health. That's going to be important. But I also think it's important for us to recognize that all of the educators who are here on our screen and will be spending time both in person or virtual with our students, this is a completely new environment for all of them. So we're all going to be doing the best we can in light of circumstances that none of us are responsible for, for everybody in this endeavor. So thank you all for going the distance tonight.
Thank you, Madam President, and to all the board trustees for their incredible support. Are there any questions from trustees tonight? Noreen or Kelly, are you good? Okay, so I just would like to close with 2 things. First of all, to my exhausted, incredible team, your hard work really showed up tonight in so many ways. And to the 4 teachers that are with us tonight, you are such an incredible credit to your profession, and your willingness to shoulder this with us. Know that we love our kids, and our kids are always at the center of our thinking. But this has been, to me, the most trying thing I have ever seen teachers have to endure. And I'm proud of the way we've supported you, but I'm also equally proud of the way you've supported your kids. So I thank the 3 of you for being here tonight. And Chris, you as well. You are a teacher, first and foremost. And we are in this together. We have a lot to figure out, but I hope the community understands that we are committed to figuring it out together. So with that, I think we should close the meeting. And I thank everybody for just the enormous contributions that were made to make this even somewhat possible for kids. Have a good night, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.